and meetings since March, in fact. We have a representative from the Attorney General's office, Raul Lozon from LCS. Director Abbey always attends, as well as other folks from his office. Secretary Romero from DFA is on. Tammy Coleman, the CFO of Albuquerque Public Schools. Quinn Lopez, who's not just an attorney, but used to work at OSI and who's also a general counsel for Western Sky Health Plan. Teresa Ann Constantidis, who is the CFO at UNM, and the CFO from the New Mexico Health Insurance Exchange. All those are formal members of the board, but as others here can testify, we always have a large group who participates in those meetings as well. The goal of the committee has been to provide general oversight to what's going on in the risk management division programs, not just the health plan, but all the other programs that RMD is responsible for. So over the past 6 months or so, we've had presentations, and the group is good about asking questions and making suggestions. There has been a particular effort, of course, at looking at the health plan, because all of us are more than aware of the fact that the financial situation with the plan is one that cries out for attention. I've been in this business, not as the OSI, but I've been in this health business for a long, long time. And quite honestly, it's unusual and not recommended to have a health plan that has zero reserves. That's a situation we find ourselves in with the state employees' health plan. Our financials are such is that our costs continue to go up, expenditures go up, and yet we know that we cannot, or the plan cannot, count on increasing contributions from the legislature, particularly in this time of financial crisis. Now, there are some really structural issues that cry out for attention that Secretary Ortiz, RMD Director Mark Tyndall, and others are well aware of. The contribution formula is set in statute. It's unusual, excuse me, to say the least. It probably needs to be revisited. Also, the policies on who's covered and who's not covered. For example, one of the surprises I had was to find out that employees who worked less than 30 hours, or individuals who work less than 30 hours a week, are covered in the plan. That's unusual. As you may know, Mr. Chairman, the standard under the Affordable Care Act is you have to work 30 hours a week. The contribution formula has not been changed in a good many years. And there's some other basic structural problems. The average age of the beneficiaries in the state health plan is much higher than your normal commercial health plan. We have, to no one's surprise, given the age, a high prevalence of chronic conditions. The pool itself is shrinking in size, which means there's less ability to spread risk. And I would argue that we also have a lack of demonstrated effectiveness from the plans on doing the kind of care and case management that might help us mitigate some of these increased cost factors. Now, we have been working, the board has, hand in hand with the Risk Management Division. I'm pleased that this year, I think we're all pleased, I should say, that this year they brought in a benefits consulting firm, and we're hopeful that they're going to give the plan a very thorough review and make some recommendations about not just tinkering around the edges, but making some fundamental changes. Finally, I want to note that the committee is advisory in nature. We don't have control. even though we meet every 2 months and raise many of these issues, many of these factors are outside of the control of the board. However, I strongly believe in the value of this oversight, and I am pleased at the level of support we've had both from GSD as well as from the committee members. Finally, I want to note the one thing that none of us control is what may happen in the Supreme Court on the challenge to the Affordable Care Act. Should that be repealed, we are facing a huge crisis here in the state. People who have pre-existing conditions will be deprived of their ability to get health care at a reasonable rate. The Medicaid expansion that we have had so much success with in the state could potentially disappear, and so could the New Mexico Health Insurance Exchange. With respect to the exchange, I would be remiss if I didn't fail to toot our own horn a little bit, and that I hope many of you saw the press release where the rates that are going to be offered this fall during open enrollment are going to decrease pretty significantly. In the Silver Plan, which is the plan that most people participate in, it will range from a decrease of 8.1% in the Santa Fe area to a high of 13.5% reduction in the Dona Ana area. For employers who participate in the so-called SHOP plan for small group employers, they will experience a 6.7% decrease in their premiums for calendar year 2021. And most importantly, at least from my perspective, is that we were successful in getting all of the plans to increase the actuarial value that they offer in their plans in the respective metal tiers. So whether it's a bronze plan or a silver plan or a gold plan, we asked them, and to their credit, they responded positively by increasing the actuarial value. So you get more benefit from your dollar with your premiums in the upcoming year that has been true in the past. Now, we would like to be able to extend those kind of decreases to the state health plan, but of course it is a very different group for the reasons I noted earlier. It's a much older group, it has much higher chronic disease, and the size of that pool is shrinking versus what we expect on the exchange, which is that more people than ever, hopefully, will sign up for coverage. I want to stop there, but first note that without being overly solicitous, I want to give due credit to the report that Connor Jorgensen has done for the LFC. He is very thorough. His report was well researched. Director Abbey will be happy to know he asks very difficult and challenging questions, but that's his job. And I appreciate the report that he put together. I think it serves the committee and serves all of us well. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have about the RMAB.
I think we're going to go ahead to the next presenter, Mark Hendahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mark, are you on?
Wait here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, my name is Mark Tyndall. I'm the new Risk Management Director. I've been with GSD for a few months now. Still get my feet under me a little bit. I'd like to thank Superintendent Toll for the time that he spent with us here at Risk Management through the the Risk Management Advisory Board. I'm still learning the WebEx stuff, and I'm sorry that under direction of my boss, I'm here remotely. I'm coming to you live from the Montoya building across town. I look forward to being able to spend time with you guys in the same place here real soon. I can't tell, can you see the screen that I'm sharing? I believe that there are handouts of this presentation as well. I've got a couple of presentations to give. I'm going to be very respectful of everybody's time and get through them pretty quick, make sure there's time for questions and get through the highlights. We're going to start with the employee benefits update. Very first page on slide number 2, I just wanted to define who we cover. And Superintendent Toll's right. We are shrinking just a little bit. Annually, we've been shrinking about 0.5%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's been going on for quite a few years. We're still a pretty good sized pool, though. We cover over 17,000 state employees, over 20,000 of their dependents. So altogether, we cover 38,000 members associated with state of New Mexico employees. Superintendent Toll was also right in that our eligibility rules are what we would consider to be relatively inclusive. We allow coverage for folks all the way down to 20 hours as opposed to the federally mandated 30 hours. We have a couple of hundred folks that fall within the part-time category. Not a huge actuarial driver, but cumulatively all of these things can add up. But that is true about our eligibility rules. We also cover a whole bunch of local public bodies. We cover 23 of the state's 33 counties, 60 of the municipalities here in town, here in the state now, as well as a few of the institutions of higher learning. New Mexico State's in our pool for benefits, those Highlands, those our good folks at the Military Institute down in Roswell. And then we have a whole lot of different semi-governmental type entities like housing districts and oil and irrigation authorities and that sort of thing. Our LPBs together add up to almost 20,000 folks. So if you add our state folks and our LPB members, we cover about 57,465 members, of which about 60% of them are covered through our Presbyterian plan, and about 40% are covered through our Blue Cross and Blue Shield of New Mexico plan. So how do we decide who pays what for their health insurance premium? As Superintendent Souls stated, it's actually based upon your salary. And the state pays a certain percentage of the total premium based upon how much money you make on an annualized basis. The bottom salary tier is everything below $50,000. Probably not surprising. That's where most of our folks are. The average state salary is about $43,000 or so is the numbers that I've seen. So most of our folks are under that $50,000 level, and the state pays 80% of their premium, and then the employee pays 20%. There's a middle bracket between $50,000 and $60,000 where the state pays 70% and the employee pays 30%. And then everything above $60,000, the state pays 60% and the employee pays 40%. If you add up the number of covered employees over there on the left and weight the averages out, the state pays on average 72% of the premiums, and our employees collectively pay an average of 28%. Now, the LPBs are excluded from that statute. So I've seen where some counties pay considerably better. I've seen where some don't pay quite as well, but that's up to them to decide for themselves what level of support they provide their employees. The next slide has a whole bunch of numbers on it. We won't spend a whole lot of time on it, but it does demonstrate the differences, and they're not huge differences, between the plans offered through the state of New Mexico, our good friends at the Public Schools Insurance Authority, as well as Albuquerque Public Schools. There are some differences in deductibles, and if you go down to a little past halfway down the page, you'll see the actuarial value. You heard Superintendent Toll mentioned. The actuarial value associated with all of our plans is actually really similar. There's just not huge differences between them. All of the plans are gold level plans. Gold is anything between 80% and 89%. Some of our plans are even closer to being platinum than they are a gold, which means on average, not at any particular service or for any particular person, but on average over the whole plan, the plan pays on our plans 85, 86%, and then the member pays the other 15 or 16%. That's what the actuarial value means. It's the percentage that the plan pays, and then the employer or the member picks up the differences. You'll also see that there aren't really huge disparities between the total premiums. Some are a little lower, some are a little higher. If you were covering folks across the state, sometimes that creates more of a problem geographically than if you've got more folks in Albuquerque, for example. And that's reflected a little bit. But you can see our where most of our folks are in the Presbyterian plan, the total premium for an individual coverage is $537. And I would venture to say that if you were to compare that to a rate that's actually available on the exchange, it's a pretty good deal for a gold level plan. You can see what the contributions are per paycheck for our folks. And you can also see the salary brackets across the bottom, which are very different. Our statute was established, the salary brackets that we currently use back in 2005. That's a long time ago. I don't know if IPSIA has been updated since they created it, whereas APS has a little bit more flexibility, and they'll talk about that. But that's something that this is a resource that we can sort of refer to as a comparison. Specific to the risk management plan for state employees and the LPVs, here's a little bit of a history of what we've done with the rates associated with our plans as compared to what national healthcare costs were. And these numbers were provided by our health benefit consultant. We're using Aon these days. And you can see that there's actually a pretty narrow range associated with what's been going on with the cost of healthcare. It used to be crazier than this. Back in the decade before FY11, which is where this one starts, you had years where healthcare costs were in the double digits as far as the trend. So it's moderated some over the years, but it's still, as you can see, above what would be the consumer price index or just standard inflation. You can also see that we haven't always been especially consistent with what we've done with our rates in response to some of the changes in medical costs. And that's created some issues over the years. You'll see where we lag behind a little bit and then we rush a bit to catch up. And part of our job will be to try to moderate that a little bit. And you can see over time, that there has been a bit of a difference between what we've done with the rates and where some of the medical costs have gone. Not a huge difference, but a little bit of one. Just to show how we performed last year, and performed would just be an assessment of did we spend more than we took in. The answer is yes, but just by a little. We actually started the year with our reserves in the negative state, not by a lot, but about $2 million. And you can see that minus $2 million across the top. And you can see every month what our revenues were, what our expenses were, and you can see mostly red numbers in that differential. There's some variation on our revenue depending upon whether it's a 3 payroll month, for example, or whether or not we get our annual rebate settlement with our PBM. But by and large, most of the time we were spending a little bit more than we were taking in until we got to the last quarter. April, May, and June, we paid out considerably less than we had in most of the months prior. And it put us in a situation where we almost broke even. We only added another couple of $1 million to the debt. I don't mean that to denigrate a couple of million. That's real money. But, and thank you for this, we also received a special appropriation from the session back in January of about $10 million. He gave us the $2 million that we were short. He gave us another $8 million. So we actually finished this last fiscal year with a positive fund balance. That's not as much as it should be. Ordinarily, a plan like ours, we would really want to make sure we could cover our IBNR, we call it, incurred but not reported. And those would be claims for which we know we owe and have a liability for, but they haven't actually worked their way through the system. Usually about a month or month and a half worth of claims, but it's probably $30 or $40 million, which is what we would want the reserve level to be, and it's not there. Now, just to point out, and I already mentioned most of this before, we started with a negative fund balance. We lost a little bit of money over the course of the year. We would have lost more, though, if it hadn't have been for that really positive last quarter, as well as the $10 million that you guys gave us the last session. So we don't have a rate increase this next July. It was decided that the raises didn't come in the way that we thought they might initially, and we didn't want our reaction to that to be something that actually caused harm to our employees. So there wasn't any rate increase effective this last July. So we're projecting a negative fund balance at the end of this fiscal year, and we project a negative fund balance at the end of fiscal year 22 as well. Now, this is if we don't do anything, and we don't plan on not doing anything. So I'm not running out of here with my hair on fire and just really going crazy. But we have challenges, obviously, and they're profound, and we will respond accordingly. Just to kind of put it into perspective, though, that $52 billion projection represents a little under 6% of the total spend over that time frame. So that's my bogey. We've got to find a way to put downward pressure on these plans of about 6%. And we'll talk about the plan to make that happen here in just a bit. I did want to demonstrate what the health plan costs look like from last year, the year before last, to this last fiscal year. I won't go over all of these numbers, but if you come about halfway down the page, you'll see the paid per member per month costs associated with the Presbyterian plan. It's about $332 the fiscal year 19, and it actually went down a little bit. Now, again, that's because of the very favorable utilization the last quarter as a result of the COVID pandemic. But the cost on the medical plan for Press actually went down a hair. On the Blue Cross plan, we don't always get the reports measured in exactly the same way, but the paid amounts, and again, our membership went down a hair, but not a lot. You'll see that we paid almost the exact same amount in this last fiscal year as we had paid the year before. One thing that I would point out, since we're on this particular slide on the bottom right, it shows how much we actually pay the health plans. The Presbyterian's ratio is very similar. Out of over $160 million that we pay out to the provider community, that's doctors and hospitals and therapists, we paid the health plan about $3 million. So our admin costs as a percentage of total medical costs is really lean. It's only about 3% or so. It varies a little bit from time to time, but it's an important concept since we are self-insured. Almost every dollar, 97 cents out of every dollar goes to the provider community, and it goes to our hospitals and doctors. Not very much of it actually goes to the health plans. One thing that's not going down is the prescription drug costs for us. Here are our top 25 drugs, 17 of which are specialty drugs, meaning that they're drugs that generally are biologically derived, large molecule, and are very expensive. Now, some of them, and this is something, we're part of the Interagency Pharmaceutical Purchasing Council, and we're having a conversation about what we can do to help put downward pressure on prescription drug costs. We haven't fixed it yet, though. I would point out, for example, Humira, which has a couple of different spots in our top 10, as well as Enbrel. Humira has been on the market since 2003. It's been out there 17 years, but the costs for it continue to go up. Enbrel's been in the market since 1998, over 20 years, and its costs continue to go up. Since they're biologic, there isn't a generic equivalent to it. We are looking forward to the development of what they call biosimilars, which is sort of the specialty version of generics. So we're hoping that we get some relief on that. But our prescription costs continue to go up, even while our medical costs actually stayed relatively flat this last year. What's driving our costs? It's mostly the folks who are really sick, not surprisingly. About 1.5% of our folks accounted for over 40% of our costs. Mostly these are people who are, really sick. And we want to try to identify and help them stay healthy before they get really sick. But you just don't see too many new chemotherapy agents that aren't really, really expensive. And cancer and circulatory issues, put our urinaries on there because that's the diagnostic category that captures our folks that are on dialysis. So that's usually in one of our top cost categories as well. Overall, if you have Presbyterian and Blue Cross and Blue Shield, you'll see that the vast majority of our top costing diagnostic categories are the same. People on Blue Cross aren't fundamentally different than people on Pres. There's some geographic differences, but the demography of them aren't all that dissimilar. But all of those combined account for more than half of our cost. Again, the pharmacy piece is what really is continuing to march forward. We didn't see any drop in pharmacy costs the fourth quarter the same way we did on the medical side. And the per member per month increase from last fiscal year to this one was 13.8%. It hadn't been that bad lately, but it spiked back up. So we have a lot of work to do in the IPPC as well as all of us in doing what we can to put downward pressure on those prescription drug costs, because almost all of it, out of the $7.38 that increased, over $5 of it were on these specialty drugs, and they're not anything that we've really been able as an industry to get our arms around and put meaningful downward pressure on. The good news out of all of this, though, and this is a credit to all of the good people who've had this job before me, and Amber and the good folks in our benefit bureau, we have really good generic utilization. Over 88% of our prescription utilization is filled through generics. We just don't have the same sort of cost inflation associated with them usually. Some few numbers do. But 88% generic fill rate is very good. So what are we going to do if we're projecting these deficits? Well, we're going to do everything we can to put downward pressure on the cost. We want to make sure that we are, in some cases, actually investing some. We want to make sure that we're removing any financial barriers to early intervention, high-value services. We've increased the number of free P visits our folks can get. We are removing any cost sharing associated with telemedicine services, which have increased dramatically. We were at a meeting on yesterday with the folks at Blue Cross and Press, and our utilization of video visits went up from under 1,000 a quarter to over 10,000 for the last few quarters. So they've gone up dramatically, which is a great thing, as people aren't comfortable necessarily going out into the world just yet, understandably so. We want to make sure that all of our folks have access to telemedicine services. State employees across the state covered by our plan, for example, have access to telemedicine services through our Saywell Health Center here in the Montoya building. So we want to make sure all of our folks know, even if you don't feel comfortable getting out of your house, you have access to care. We also have some new things that are part of our contracts that's coming up here that provide services to some of our most vulnerable members. Presbyterian offers access to community health workers. Blue Cross and Blue Shield actually employs EMTs or paramedics to go check in on folks who may have some excessive ER utilization or may have some environmental issues that we can help them out with. Also, in our contracts that are starting this last fiscal year, we finally, and it took us a very long time to get this, but we finally have some real value-based purchasing principles that allow us to start evolving beyond paying all of our providers on a fee-for-service basis. Presbyterian has some pay-for-performance for our type 2 diabetics. Medicare, or Blue Cross and Blue Shield, will be paying bundled payments for joint replacements modeled after Medicare, which has successfully saved a good chunk of money through that program. We will also be offering a new health carrier effective January 1st, Cigna. We're going to offer them a little bit different. We're going to start the concept of actually expanding our portfolio a little bit. So the Cigna plan will be offered with a little bit higher deductible, a little bit higher out-of-pocket maximum, but it'll actually be a little bit cheaper than our current premiums, meaning that effective January 1st, every single state employee will have the opportunity to pay less in health insurance premiums. Now, not a lot less. It's like 1%. The actuarial value difference is a little bit more than that. So it's still a net positive for our plan. But it gives everybody that wider financial choice to pay them a little bit less. Now, not everybody's going to want to. Most people probably won't want to. Cigna's network is very different than Blue Cross's. It's more similar to Presbyterian's, but there are still some differences. But it's another option that we think provides a better variety of choices for our folks. And it also, we think, might kick into gear a little bit more competition between the health plans, which we think can be a good thing as well. Finally, and we're just going to have to face this as a possibility as well, there may be some things that we have to do to the plans beyond a little tinkering here and there. And we will evaluate very closely what our costs and revenues are, and we'll have to make adjustments to the plan designs as we go along as well. As an IBAC, we've been meeting with our carriers. We started meeting with them again last week to emphasize some of the things Superintendent Toll said. We needed to make sure that we are clearly able to demonstrate efficacy in managing our folks with chronic illnesses, as well as our folks that are in the high dollar cost category. But the biggest unknown variable of all of this is what's going to continue to happen with medical utilization as a result of COVID. We just don't know. The first couple of months of claim data for this fiscal year have still shown some suppression there. We don't know when or exactly how much it'll snap back. But it puts an element of unknown out there that hadn't really existed before. And so we need to pay close attention to it, and we will continue to do so. My next presentation will go a little bit quicker. This is the risk presentation. Just to go through this, the first slide for our risk, and risk here at Risk Management is everything else. It's our property casualty, it's our legal, it's our workers' comp, it's our unemployment, it's all of those other elements of the risk management division. Just to start off, I wanted to show how we develop our premiums for the different lines of coverages that we turn around and bill to the state agencies. And here's this year's allocation report. Basically, what we do is we take any given entities for each line of coverage, we take their losses over the last 5 years, average that, and then use that loss experience and using a ratio along with what an entity's actual exposure is, and then we come up with a base premium from there. You can see most of them, we take 70% experience, 30% exposure. It varies from line of coverage to line of coverage, and we have an actuary that works all of this out. The good news is, and it's probably the only really good piece of good news I have for you today, is that number is considerably lower this year than it was last year. If you look down at the bottom right-hand side of the page, all of these lines of coverage add up to a total premium of $53 million. Last year, our total premium that we charged out was $65 million. So there's actually a 19% reduction along those lines. When we were taking the 5 years of incurred losses, we dropped off 2014, which was a year that had $55 million in incurred losses, and we added on 2019, which only had $27 million. So some of the losses that we had booked and assumed would happen haven't played out that way. So our overall premiums are actually lower this year than they were last year. Now, not for everybody, to be sure, and it depends on the line of coverage, and we'll look at some of that here in just a second. We provide legal services, of course, here at Risk Management when there's legal action taken against state employees or agencies, and it costs a chunk to defend. So we've provided this over the years to show what we paid this last year in legal services is not materially different than what we have. It's actually been in a relatively narrow range. Just so you'll know, we pay a range of fees to our contracted attorneys. We pay at the bottom end of the scale. Paralegals make about $80 an hour, and our fees cap out at $165 an hour for a very experienced attorney. But last year, we paid about right at $11 million in legal fees as the cost of defense. The liability claims that we see in terms of the most frequent agencies, probably no surprise, University of New Mexico Hospital, the malpractice issues are part of that. We have a very good partnership with their committee that helps us as those settlements and conversations take place. Department of Transportation, either accidents as a result of the way roads are, or if a cow gets out of a fence that they're responsible for and wanders onto a road, those sorts of things. But these are the top 5 agencies that we generally have liability claims above $250,000. In terms of the lines of coverage, you'll see the biggest number there is associated with the medical malpractice. Next is civil rights, which is a topic that's being discussed a lot over this interim session as well. On the property side, our biggest customers are similar. Still the university. GSD, because of the facilities management division, is up there. We haven't, and I'm knocking on wood and throwing salt over my shoulder, we haven't had a whole lot of large property claims lately. As a matter of fact, we've really only had one this last year. New Mexico State had a fire that looks like it's going to come in above that level. In terms of what type of property claims we see, this is what we generally see: flood, wind and hail, fire. Thankfully, there are no locusts or frogs on there, but this year's not over yet, so we're hopeful that it doesn't change. We did not make any major changes to our liability certificate or property certificates this last year. The only thing that we did do, we've had to add in a time limit associated with agencies when they want to report a loss. If something goes bad and you need to file a claim, that's fine. That's why we're here. But you need to do so within 18 months from the date of the loss, or we don't get any coverage for it through our excess carriers. So that's the only really major change we made. This slide, I'm sorry, I lost the slide number. This would be the bad news part of the risk side of the house. This is from Aon, which was our broker at the time of this last renewal for our excess coverage. And it shows what increases were over the last few years for excess. We were coming out of a multi-year rate guarantee into what was defined as a very, very hard market, and our excess coverages went up in premium a lot. Generally, our property excess, we have a $500,000 retention or deductible, and that's still in place, but the premiums did go up a chunk. They also went up on the Rail Runner. They went down on the Rail Runner property side. I want to put this in perspective, though, because what we pay in excess premiums is actually a relatively small amount of the total amounts that we pay out under the fund, less than 3% actually. So our excess went up a lot, but our overall premiums for this year actually went down. How are the funds doing? Our liability fund, if you look at the middle column, we started out this last fiscal year at $71 million, and we finished closer to 73. You'll see that we're projecting FY21 to stay pretty steady as well. On the bottom right of the fund slide, you'll see what percentage that fund is as a percentage of the projected outstanding liabilities that we've already incurred. For the liability fund, we try to keep it around 100%. Sometimes it gets a little bit below that. It's yellow, but it's not red, and we don't consider the fund to be unstable at all. On the public property fund, You'll see that we started FY20 with a little over 18 million. We finished with 21. We project to that maybe to reverse out a little bit in FY21. But in the bottom right, you'll see that there aren't as many outstanding liabilities associated with the property fund. The tail on some of the liability issues takes a long time to work through. There are acts that are, going to cost us a settlement or litigation amount that happen now that are going to take years to work through the system. It's not that way on the property fund, so there just aren't as big on a dollar amount or the projected outstanding liabilities. Having said that, the fund itself does not contemplate any actual future losses beyond what we've seen historically. I mentioned we have a $500,000 deductible every time there's a property claim. And that's true in the vast majority of cases. But for hail damage on the eastern side of the state, our deductible is actually $5 million. So our property and casualty Bureau Chief, Mr. Crawley, he knows exactly where and when it's hailed anywhere in the state of New Mexico, anytime there's a storm. But you can see that from an actuarial standpoint, the property fund's stable as well. So is the workers' comp fund. Started this last year with 28 million, actually finished with 34. We don't see quite as many new workers' comp claims as a result of the COVID work situation with so many of us working from home so many days. But we're still seeing some. It hadn't gone down as much as I actually thought it would. People still get hurt at home while they're working, just like they got hurt at work while they were working. Now, the tail or the outstanding liabilities of workers' comp funds extends for decades. There are some cases where we're going to be paying against a workers' comp claim until the day the claimant departs this mortal plane. So we don't fully fund the workers' comp fund, but we do try to keep it above 50%, and we have. The last fund is the state unemployment fund, which has been pretty steady. It's yellow though, and you can see over in the right, FY20, we were paying a little less than $1 million each quarter. And then the last quarter, we paid over $2 million. And we're working with the folks at Workforce Solutions to try to make sure that we're able to project and make sure that this fund is kept where it needs to be. But that's going to be a continued work in progress. And we are hopeful that, as the economy comes back, that this doesn't continue to be an issue. But it is something we definitely need to keep our eyes out for. So everybody, thank you for your time and the opportunity. And I will pass it on along.
Go ahead. On the Public School Insurance Authority.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Richard Valerio. I'm the Executive Director for the Public School Insurance Authority, otherwise known as NIMSIA. I'm joined with our Deputy Director today, Patrick Sandoval. He's also our Chief Financial Officer. We provided you a packet today that has the PowerPoint presentation and also a comparison of our different medical plans and premium rate sheets. Starting on the first slide, just a brief history of NIMSIA. We were created by the legislature in 1986. At that time, school districts were finding it difficult to purchase affordable insurance or even obtain coverage altogether. And so the solution was pulling the districts together to increase their purchasing power in order to secure affordable rates and superior coverages. Charter schools were added to NIMSIA after passing of the Charter Schools Act in 1999. And so looking at NIMSIA today on slide 3, you'll see we insure all 88 charter schools, all 88 districts except for APS, 96 charter schools, and so that's all charter schools, including those that are chartered under APS, 27 other educational entities, which includes higher educational institutions, 47,000 employees and their dependents. We have an 11 staff FTE, and we're governed by an 11-member board of directors. Slide 4, you'll see our FY22 appropriation request. This year, we're asking for a 10.51% increase over FY21, which totals $458,076,531. And you can see in the chart the different breakouts by fund. NIMSIA does not receive any direct general fund appropriations. Premium rates are decided by the NIMSIA Board of Directors. The employer funding for premiums is dispersed from the general fund through the state equalization guarantee to schools, who then remit to NIMSIA. For fiscal year FY22, the impact to public school support is $19.3 million to fund the employer share of premiums. This consists of $13.8 million for employee benefits premiums and $5.5 million for risk premiums. Employer contributions for employee benefits averages about 63%. APS will receive approximately 1/3 of any increases to insurance and public school support due to the mechanisms of the funding formula. This reduces the amount of any additional funding to NIMSIA participating schools. Slide 5 shows the offerings provided under the Employee Benefits Program. NIMSIA offers self-insured medical plans through Blue Cross Blue Shield, Presbyterian, and Cigna Health, who is a new carrier offered this year. NIMSIA offers self-insured prescription drug coverage through Express Scripts and self-insured dental coverages through United Concordia, and now also Delta Dental, who is also a new carrier being offered this year. Vision coverage is fully insured through Davis Vision, and life and disability plans are offered through the Standard. NIMSIA has a dedicated customer service team that assists members with claim issues and appeals and offers members wellness and well-being programs through various providers. In addition, NIMSIA recently offered a discounted gym membership program to our members. More information on our benefits, plan designs, and packages can be found in your packet and online at nimsia.com. Slide 6 shows the claim summary and differences between plans year 2018 and 2019. One of the biggest challenges that NIMSIA faces in terms of cost is that 85% of NIMSIA members reside in rural communities outside of the Albuquerque area, which means there's less provider competition and higher costs to recruit and retain healthcare professionals. In addition, the providers try to attempt to make up for lower Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement rates. The chart shows that medical and pharmacy trends are not favorable, driven by both cost and utilization. Emergency room utilization has increased, which is primarily driven by increased patient costs, and prescription drug costs have also increased due to specialty drug costs such as oncology treatments for chemotherapy. Slide 7 is a very interesting chart and shows the distribution of plan paid claims and the impact of high-cost claimants. Here you will see that 1% of our membership is accounting for 37.2% of the medical plan spend. 5% is accounting for 66.5% of the plan spend. So a very small population is accounting for the majority of the expenses, while the larger, healthier population is subsidizing the cost. The next slide breaks down the major medical conditions and prevalence. Diabetes, hypertension, and asthma are 3 of the most costly conditions driving spend. In an effort to mitigate and reduce those costs, NIMSIA has disease management and care management programs available through all medical carriers at no additional cost to the member. We have recently implemented diabetes, hypertension, and weight management programs through Livongo. With Livongo, it's a really neat program in that members are issued Bluetooth and cellular connected blood sugar meters, blood pressure monitors, and connected scales, which are connected to a mobile application. Through the mobile application, members have access to one-on-one live coaching, real-time tips, and community support. We've also implemented a similar program for pulmonary remote monitoring through Express Scripts. And so the graphics on the top left of the slide are examples of the device that are issued to the participating members. Slide 9, you'll see that telemedicine visits have also been offered to our members at no cost. This virtual alternative offers members access to care for non-emergency medical and behavioral health needs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with a savings to both the member and the plan. This is especially beneficial during this time, during COVID-19. A virtual visit averages around $66 per visit, while an urgent care visit can cost $157 and an ER visit as much as $1,679. The utilization for telemedicine visits has increased over 800% this year, with over 16,000 visits through June. Just turn to slide 10. This gives a summary of our prescription drug costs and the comparison between plan year 2018 and 2019. The total cost of prescription drugs has increased by 15.1% to a total of $62.9 million. The increase is largely due to increases in specialty drug utilization and cost. NIMSIA does have a very favorable generic fill rate at 86.6%, and we will continue to promote the utilization of generics as new brand name drugs enter the market. In addition, we're also a member of the Interagency Pharmaceutical Purchasing Council. Slide 11 shows the top indications for prescription drug expenditures, which you will see correlates with the major medical conditions discussed on slide 8. NIMSIA has various clinical savings measures in place. which you'll see on slide 12. So we have prior authorization, drug quantity management, and step therapy, which saved the plan last year $5.4 million. Slide 13 gets into some of the Safeguard RX programs that we have through our partner Express Scripts, and the value of those programs also saved an additional $6.9 million last year. Slide 14 gets into the impact of COVID-19. Back in March, Superintendent Toll issued an emergency order prohibiting health insurers from imposing cost sharing, including copays, coinsurance, and deductibles for testing and healthcare services related to COVID-19. The rule also covers pneumonia, influenza, and any disease or condition that is subject to a public health emergency. This emergency rule did not apply to self-insured insurance pools such as NMCIA. However, the Interagency Benefits Advisory Committee decided it was in the best interest of our members to opt in and provide the same benefit to our members. And so because of that and with that, through August 31st, you'll see that through NMCIA membership, we've completed 4,591 tests. 413 have tested positive. The test cost for that is $436,604. We've treated 2,438 patients. The treatment cost is $1,284,789 for a total cost through August 31st of $1.7 million. Slide 15 shows the cost impact modeling of delayed and canceled non-essential care due to COVID-19. Our actuaries are projecting a reduction of $14.9 million in medical expense, with $5.1 million of that coming back into the plan. And so the net savings that we're projecting this time is $9.8 million. We're continuing to analyze and monitor this as COVID-19 continues, and we'll be updating these projections as time goes on. Slide 16 shows the historical premium rate increases for employee benefits and the current and projected increases for FY21 and 22. For this fiscal year, we passed on a 6% increase to our high and EPO option plans and a 2.1% to our low option plans, which go into effect October 1st. Originally, we had passed on an 8.7% increase to the high and EPO options, but reconsidered and are utilizing about $20 million in fund balance to subsidize this lower premium in an effort to try to keep our premiums as low as possible for our members. We did consider a 0% increase. However, looking at that was going to get us into a large deficit, and so the board didn't find that financially prudent. Slide 17 shows the impact of the 6% and the 2.1% to the low options, and so you'll see what the monthly impact on employee contributions are. For example, if you're a single member on our Blue Cross Blue Shield high option, which is our most expensive plan, earning less than $15,000, your monthly impact will be $1,084. If you're on the high option plan under Blue Cross, a family member earning over $25,000 member, your monthly impact is $44.04. Slide 18 shows the fund health for an employee benefits fund for FY21 and 22. The fund had a beginning fund balance this fiscal year of $31.6 million. As I mentioned earlier, we're utilizing about $20 million to offset that lower premium rate increase, so projected fund balance at the end of this fiscal year is $10.9 million. We're anticipating the use of an additional $11.5 million in fund balance in FY22, leaving the fund in a slight deficit of $693,000. This amount is net of cash reserves and liabilities such as claims reserves. That's it for the benefits program, and starting with slide 19, we'll be discussing the risk program. On slide 19, you'll see that under the risk program, we insure over $26 billion in assets, of which 60% of properties are located in the worst protection class. $2 billion in payroll for about 44,000 employees, 325,000 students, 44,000 student athletes, 9,000 volunteers, and 9,300 vehicles, including buses. Slide 20 shows our year-over-year claim spend for property, liability, and workers' compensation claims. You'll see a big spike in FY20 for liability, which was due to sexual molestation claims that we'll get to in a minute. Slides 21 and 22 show the claims frequency and severity for liabilities, worker compensation claims. Claims frequency is the number of claims, and severity is the cost of those claims. So you can see the frequency is going down, which is a testament to our loss prevention efforts. However, the severity is going up, so that means that the claims cost and the expense for those claims is becoming more costly. Slide 23 shows the 10-year history of sexual molestation claims, which is very unfortunate and has become our biggest liability. There have been 87 sexual molestation claims filed over the last 10 years with an incurred cost of $24.3 million. Please note this does not include recent payouts of $22.3 million for claims that predate this 10-year history. And that $22.3 million in spend was for one perpetrator with multiple victims, and that claim continues to be ongoing. Slide 24 shows similar information for property claims, which is also our second largest cost driver in the risk pool. Slide 26 shows the historical premium rate increase. Let me get into slide 25. Slide 25 shows our loss prevention programs and some of the different efforts that we're trying to keep our costs down. We contract with Palms and Associates that manages our loss prevention role and loss prevention program. And so you'll see we have different programs related to ergonomics, threat assessment and active shooter, on-school site facility audits, identifying a predator training, armed school employees. One of the new things that we're trying to introduce this year is Sandy Hook Promise, which is an anonymous reporting program, and we're hoping to get that implemented statewide. Slide 26 shows the historical premium rate increases for the risk fund. This fiscal year, we decided to pass on no increase to schools to try to help them out with their budgets, and for next year, we're anticipating an 8.82% in increases overall. Slide 27 shows the health of the risk fund. The fund had a beginning fund balance this year of $7.1 million. We're projecting an ending fund balance of $2.8 million. The projected ending fund balance for 22 is $1.3 million, which is net of cash reserves and liabilities such as incurred but not reported and claims reserves. With that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation.
We have one other presentation on the employee benefit of APS. Is it Valerie Atencio? Are you on? She's on mute. Huh? She's on mute. Can you hear us? Can't hear us.
Valerie, we can't hear you. We still can't hear you.
So I apologize. I have unmuted.
Here you are.
We can hear you
We
now.
can hear you now.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Valerie Atencio. I am the Senior Director of Employee Benefits and Wellness with Albuquerque Public Schools. And with us today, we also have our Chief of Human Resources and Risk Management, Todd Torgerson, and our Senior Director of Risk Management, Michael Brown. So I will share our presentation, which you should have in your packet.
We have it.
So we will start with the benefits information from APS. So challenges as we looked toward calendar year 2021 with benefits, things we know and things that we know we don't know. Things we know, medical costs and prescription drug costs continue to increase. Things that we know we don't know are the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. We do not know what those direct costs for testing and treatment, how that impact will ultimately play out. We don't know the impact of the delayed and canceled care. We know there's potential as a result of delayed and canceled care. There's potential for the increased severity or complications, which ultimately will result in higher costs for those things once they come back into play. So you can see in the chart to the right on this slide, the graphic for calendar year 2020 and into calendar year 2021, the dip during the pandemic time. You see the green above the chart, which is when those costs and services re-engage, and then just the overall trajectory meets back up and continues the climb. So that's what we anticipate seeing. But again, not much time and not a whole lot of information for projecting those trends for that. Other things that were in play this year, the 2020 special legislative session outcome with HB1, that school district or charter school shall not pay an increase of more than 6% for group health insurance premium increases for fiscal year 2021. And then also in play for us, an unknown for impact, is the IBAC Big Bid RFP results, where we are adding Cigna as a fourth medical carrier for APS employees as well. So continued challenges, again, the COVID, and there is a correction on this slide, it's calendar year 2021. As you'll see, for testing and treatment, we're projecting and estimating a 2.4% increase on our medical costs as a result of this particular aspect of the COVID details. So this, again, is just the cost of COVID added onto. It does not reflect the dip in services, delayed and canceled services that occurred in 2020. APS recent historical experience, our 2019 medical claims trend was at 7.7%, which outpaced the national trend that Siegel, our consulting agency, had done at 7.1%. And it was an increase, it outpaced the projection that had been done for us at 6.3%. These increases are driven by inpatient facility, emergency room, and medical pharmacy claims. Those are our high drivers in those areas. Also, our 2019 prescription drug claims trend at 12.7%, which again significantly outpaced the national trend projection from Siegel at 7.5%, and the budget projection for APS, which was at 9%. So huge, really a huge outpacing there on that one. More recently, in 2020 through May of 2020, we had 3 large claimants that were already at $2.5 million in total plan payout, compared to 2019 for the entire year with our 4 large claimants that year, with a total of $2 million plan payout for the whole year. So for 2021 calendar year premium and plan design, these things consider the APS self-fund reserve requirements and legislative action and requirements. The projections that we had was that we would need an 11.3% premium increase to account for the projected increases in medical costs. And so obviously that was not doable, but here are some things that we put in place and that the APS Board of Education approved. From the IBAC RFP, Cigna has been added as a fourth medical provider, and they have presented themselves as able to significantly manage costs with the way they manage their network. We did a 6% premium increase with our medical, dental, and vision premiums. We simplified our medical plan designs. We went from a 3-tier design to a single-tier design, and we've gone to an exclusive provider option, the EPO, versus the preferred provider option, the PPO. So we've got Presbyterian and True Health New Mexico that will be our exclusive provider options, and then Blue Cross Blue Shield New Mexico and Cigna will be our PPO options, where our out-of-network access option exists for our employees. We also made changes to the medical plan designs, and that included some adjustments that projected result is a 4.8% lower medical claims costs. We also are instituting a medical premium differential for the first time for calendar year 2021. So our EPOs, which are more generous plans, they will have a higher premium cost, so higher upfront, less cost at the time of service. And then our PPOs will have less premium cost, but a slightly higher cost at the time of service. So considerations and impact as a result of all of this, the impact on the district is a 6% premium increase over 2020 premium contribution amounts. And also with this cost sharing, we will have a $1.3 million drawdown on our reserve for calendar year 2021. The impact on our employees is an average 6% premium increase across the medical, dental, and vision, but it depends on the medical plan selection that our employees make, and that these percentages factor in those premium differentials that we are putting in place for the new calendar year. So the impact on take-home pay for our employees, for those employees who receive the 1% salary increase, everyone on single coverage will experience a net increase to their take-home pay regardless of their 2021 plan election. And then anyone not on a single coverage, they have the option with our Blue Cross Blue Shield New Mexico PPO that they would experience. If they choose that option, they would have a net increase to their take-home pay as well, regardless of the coverage tier. So there are options for our employees. As we enter the open enrollment period, they can make changes to their plans to start January 1, 2021. And so at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Torgerson.
Thank you, Valerie, and good job. Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. I am Todd Torgerson, Chief of Human Resources and Legal Support Services for Albuquerque Public Schools. I'm here today with Mike Brown. He's our Senior Director of Risk Management. Good to see you all again, and I would like to thank you for allowing us this opportunity to present to you today. The APS Risk Management Program, like the benefits program, continues to be fully self-insured. The mission of the Risk Management Department is to provide APS schools with effective and efficient property and casualty insurance services to mitigate accidental losses and minimize disruption to the learning environment. As noted on slide 10, the district employs over 12,000 employees, of which 6,652 are certified educators. APS has 92 elementary schools, 30 middle schools, 21 high schools, and 12 schools of choice, 75% of which are Title I high poverty schools. The total insured property value is over $2.9 billion. The district carries excess general liability insurance of $20 million. And Valerie, go ahead and jump back up a little bit to the claim slide. There you go. The district's claims have been very stable over the last 6 years. This is true of both property and casualty claims, as well as the workers' compensation claims in terms of both frequency and severity. Claim payments, as you'll note on the slide for both programs, are down below the 6-year rolling average. APS anticipates a flat loss rate of $1.17 per $100 of payroll for its workers' compensation program. This anticipated loss experience is really right in line with trend. All of these programs, as you'll see in the workers' comp budget and the property and casualty budget, are funded to an actuarial confidence level of 90%, which means in actuarial terms, we have enough money there in reserve to pay all of our claims on 9 out of 10 years. So in addition to the claim stability, there's also stability and consistency within the risk management team. They're a great team. They've been together 9 years. While the claims and fact patterns are always diverse and certainly very interesting, there isn't a claim that they haven't seen. The risk team recently took on additional responsibility this year of handling the district's American with Disabilities Act accommodation program. This move better aligns and supplements the district's return to work program. In fact, Albuquerque Public Schools has really implemented a premier return to work program. And this program is really to help workers safely and efficiently recover after work-related injury. This really ties into the ADA program that we have. And because of the hard work, dedication, and commitment of our staff that they've shown to the program, the State Workers' Compensation Program awarded APS an A grade in our Return to Work Best Practices program. And we've been recognized, APS has been recognized as a Return to Work champion by the State of New Mexico Workers' Compensation Program. We're very proud of this work, and it's nice to be recognized as one of the preeminent return to work programs in the state, and quite frankly, I think nationally. Go ahead, Valerie, next slide. Slide 12 shows the district's historical retention and deductible history. There's no changes that are being made to our retentions. That is, the districts will maintain retentions of $250,000 for property, $350,000 for excess liability, $5,000 for crime coverage, $650,000 for workers' compensation, and, well, Actually, the 350 is for excess liability and private coverage, 650,000 for the workers' comp, and 5,000 for boiler machine. Here's where we get to some of the rate changes. As we begin to go out to market for fiscal year 22, APS anticipates an increase of 30% for our property markets. Again, I said we have $2.9 billion that we're insuring. This is really a market-driven factor outside of on the excess layers with respect to fires and floods that are happening nationally. I mean, if you look at California, now's the time to get your wine from Napa Valley before it becomes all smoky. So 7% for liability, we're going to see a change there. This is reflective, I think, of that COVID uncertainty. When our actuary was presenting on the benefit side, one of the things, and Valerie mentioned this too, we're really, we have our known, this is like a Don Rumsfeld quote, we have our known knowns, we have our known unknowns, and we have a lot of unknown unknowns. And I think we're seeing a lot of that, and we'll see a lot of that certainly in our price points for insurance rates going forward. We will anticipate a 3% increase in our workers' comp. All of these increases will cost the district a combined total of $2.9 million for this insurance piece, not counting the 6% of the $90 million for the benefit side. So in closing, while the APS benefits and risk programs are not funded by a direct appropriation like my esteemed colleagues at NMCA and GSD, APS is requesting an $8.3 million increase in the public school support budget insurance allocation. And with that, we will gladly stand for any questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I just had a couple of quick questions, and they principally are because this is an area that I don't have a great understanding for. But to Director Tyndall, I was going to ask a question on the deficit mitigation strategies. Page 16 of your presentation. On that presentation, we talk about applying value-based purchasing principles. Sir, I think that's a great title and certainly one that gives one a lot of interest. And there I read that we pay for performance related to improved clinical outcomes for diabetics. And my question, sir, is why don't we just do that for all clinical outcomes?
Sure, Representative Anderson, I think that's a great idea. And I would love to evolve to where we can say that. It's not kind of where we've started, though. Historically, the way providers have been reimbursed under commercial health plans, which is pretty much what we are. We're like our own little commercial health plan. We pay on a fee-for-service basis. The doctor, does an office visit, they charge us, we pay them. They do a lab test, they charge us, we pay them. They do a surgery, they charge us, we pay them, based upon what they've done. We do that whether it helped or not, whether there was a good outcome or not. So you're not wrong in that we would love to be able to make all of our payments based upon actual clinical outcomes, but as an industry, we're not quite there yet. It may surprise you, it may not. We're not actually even all that good at measuring what a good clinical outcome was just based upon the data and the pay claim information that we have. There are some specific elements associated with the outcome of diabetics in terms of how their hemoglobin A1C is going, making sure they're not going into the emergency room, that they're getting their kidney screenings and their retina screenings. And we would love and look forward to continuing conversations with the legislature and Superintendent Toll and all of our health plan partners of how we can get where you think we should be already. And we accept that challenge, and we'll move forward and expect to be able to report progress.
Thank you, Director, for that answer. I think it's a great answer. I want to change the subject, if I could, Mr. Tyndall, to liability. There's a presentation on the FY22 allocation report, and in there, we're looking at a general liability coverage coming across on that second line. I'm going to ask for short answers if there is an answer, and it's really looking forward and thinking about future public policy decisions that may be coming here in the state of New Mexico. And I was curious about those decisions and the reflection of those decisions on liability to the state of New Mexico, and whether our current coverage is sufficient for the changes that might be ahead. There are three of them. One is implied immunity. If New Mexico were to withdraw implied immunity to our public employees, are we covered for that, or would we expect rising premiums as a result of that?
Chair Representative Anderson, as it turns out, the Risk Management Division is by statute associated with and part of the conversation with the newly created Civil Rights Commission. And that is part of the conversation taking place. The short answer is our current premium structure does not contemplate those potential future changes. And at the most basic level, we would anticipate there to be an increased cost associated with that. We're not able to provide specifics associated with what we think our actuaries may tack on as a result until we get a little bit more specific direction. But no, the current premiums don't contemplate that. We are involved in a conversation of how that may be quantified in the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tyndall. And my response is I hope the Civil Rights Commission will be able to include that in the scope of their pursuit of understanding whether implied immunity ought to be stand as it is or whether it ought to be cut back. Two more answers short will be better because I'm running out of time, sir. One is on, do you think in the special session, there was a bill that would have given immunity to employers, individuals, institutions, churches, all the above on COVID-19 being somewhat of a pandemic undefined illness, and whether employers face liability in the future from, let's say, alleged improper practices in dealing with COVID-19. In other words, sir, I guess, are you satisfied that our current coverage takes care of New Mexico and our schools, universities, athletics relative to COVID-19 future claims?
Mr. Chair, Representative Anderson, I'm afraid I'm going to have to go back and look a little bit before I express my satisfaction specific to that. I'll need to formulate a better reply in terms of the nature of the coverage that already exists and the challenges that COVID puts on that. And I'll have to get back through LFC staff to make sure we get you an answer on that.
Thank you, sir. And my interest is purely on liability, as it is on this third question, and it has to do with legalizing marijuana. Have you given any consideration to expanded liability on the part of the state if it were to legalize marijuana?
Mr. Chair, Representative Anderson, in my 4 months since I've started here, that is not a conversation that we've had.
Thank you very much for that answer. I'm sure it will be asked again in January when I understand that issue will be before the next session of the legislature. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Senator Kernan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up briefly on the question regarding reimbursement based on outcomes, and I think one of the things you run the risk of is you have patients that are compliant and some that are not. And so typically, when you have a patient that's not compliant, you're going to see physicians decide maybe they don't want that patient. So you have to be really careful when you reimburse based on outcomes. So that's just something to think about. I have a couple of questions with regard to NIPSIA's report on page 12. Several years ago, we passed a couple of bills, prior authorization bill and step therapy bill. And so as I'm looking at this particular slide, maybe Superintendent Toll, could you bring us up to date on guidelines with regard to the prior authorization bill that we passed a couple of years ago and how that impacts this particular slide?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, thank you for the question. A reminder that we issue guidelines only for insurance, not for self-insured arrangements. So we don't tell NIPSIA or the state health plan or Albuquerque Public Schools what they can or cannot do. With respect to the prior authorization, it is on the books. We are going to be issuing rules to implement that legislation before this year is out. That's our timetable. On step therapy, I'm not aware that we've issued any rules on that. I can tell you that it will be something we take up when we finally get some clarification from either Congress or from the Supreme Court as whether the states can regulate pharmacy benefit managers or not. Right now, that is up for decision. I can tell you as a general rule, we frown on most step therapy.
So thank you very much for that, and Mr. Chairman, and I guess maybe I just didn't realize that our school teachers and educators weren't covered by the prior authorization legislation or the step therapy. So I understand the savings and all, but when you listen to the testimony and at the end of the day, I think maybe there might be some long-term savings when individuals get the care they need without having to go through some of the roadblocks with regard to both of these. So just something to think about. And I do want to ask a question with regard to our schools and risk management and what they're going through right now with regard to COVID-19 and what the requirements are to reopen schools. And it seems as though I'm hearing from some superintendents that risk management with regard to NIPSIA, that there's some questions and how are you handling those school districts with regard to, we want to make sure that they comply, but on the other hand, I think they're under a lot of stress. And I just want to make sure that NIPSIA understands that. And if you could share with me some of the conversations maybe you've had out in the districts with regard to what the expectation is on our districts.
Mr. Chair, Senator, that's actually a good point and kind of circles back to Representative Anderson's question on liability for COVID-19. We've been meeting and looking on this, and we do foresee that there is going to be liability associated with this. We just don't know how much. Our actuaries aren't able to look at this because there's no claim history for anything that's this big or related to a virus or a pandemic. And so to that point, what we have been, we've created a task force with some membership from the NIMSIA board. We also had a discussion with the Superintendents Association, the School Boards Association, representation from charter schools, and the school business officials. So one of the things that we were facing and had an issue with was the way our liability currently works is we have $1 million in self-insured retention, meaning that we are on the hook for the first $1 million for any liability claims that comes out of the NIMSIA fund, and then we have reinsurance or excess insurance for anything above that. And so, for example, for sexual molestation claims, we have up to about $35 million in coverage for that. Now that we've gone out to the market for this year's excess coverages, all of the major carriers are denying or excluding any coverage related to COVID-19. So we haven't been able to purchase any excess coverage for that. And so when we were in those negotiations, we sent out a letter to school districts urging them to follow the PED reentry guidelines, the public health orders, governor's executive orders, and any CDC recommendations to the best of their ability in order to mitigate any of those costs. And so that letter was taken, and there were some misconceptions on that, and assuming that NIMSIA was going to be denying coverage or excluding any coverage for COVID-19 related. So that's not true. One of the things that we've come up with under the task force is we feel that most of the claims are going to be related to negligence, and so we feel that those claims will be filed under state court under the Tort Claims Act. And so in our memorandum of coverage that we're taking for final approval to our board next week, we did include coverage for COVID-19 related liability with the coverages and limits under the Tort Claims Act. And so we hope that that covers that. And from the conversations we've had with superintendents and charter schools, that's reassured them that they're covered and they're comfortable now with opening up schools. The other thing to that is that we're also not policing the re-entry with that. All we're simply doing is recommending that they have a plan, follow that, not be negligent, and so we're not just going to be denying claims. One of the tools that we have under NMCIA is a loss prevention rule, and so if we do receive a complaint from a school saying that they're being negligent or not enforcing masks or something to that effect, we would then send out our loss prevention carrier, Ponds and Associates, to do a safety audit. And then with that, they issue them a report, and they have a certain amount of time to respond to that and take corrective action. They can also appeal to our loss prevention committee to appeal that if they feel that was done unjustly. But there's going to be a formal process, and so any school would know prior hand if they were going to lose coverage or be denied a claim before we would ever do such a thing. So they are covered, and that will be taken care of for this year. We have also looked into possible coverage for claims that might be filed in federal court. We think it's going to be very hard to get it under there. So right now, we really think everything's going to fall under the state tort claims.
Thank you very much. That was really helpful, and I appreciate kind of clearing the air on that, and I think everybody probably is more comfortable. I do want to just mention that some of the things that I'm hearing, and I think we'll have testimony on that in the next few days with regard to the reentry plan, and districts are trying to follow it, but it just changes pretty much every day. So I hope you all recognize that and work with the districts in order that we can all do this safely and get those kids back. I have another question with regard to Cigna coming on board, and I wonder if anyone knows, will they expand their network over into outside the borders of New Mexico, for instance, in Lubbock and Midland, those areas? Do we know if Cigna's going to be contracting with physicians in those areas?
Mr. Chair, Senator, they do have a network that's very similar to Presbyterian, and there is coverage outside of the state.
So they'll be also out there. That's good news. I have one other question with regard to claims, as those claims are filed throughout the state for various reasons. Typically, when you have a school district with a claim, are those claims typically filed within the judicial jurisdiction of that particular school district?
Mr. Chair, Senator, typically it depends on the claim type and I guess what the claim would be filed for. For example, on a sexual molestation case, that may not be the case because they'd want to file under that as a civil rights violation in federal court rather than in their state court or local jurisdiction, and try to get that out of the tort claims. But once they file that in federal court, then there's no tort claims calculated.
So any claims filed in state court, Mr. Chair, typically are those claims that are filed in state court on behalf of students, or even when you look at the full range, I noticed the medical malpractice for across the board, that has increased a great deal. Typically, are those filed within the judicial jurisdiction of where the event occurred?
Mr. Chair, Senator, yes, those are.
Within those particular counties?
Within those counties, yes.
Thank you very much.
Representative Crowder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few quick questions. Start with the lady from Albuquerque Schools. And I'm going to have the same question for NMCIA as well. On page 6 of the Albuquerque presentation, it talks about a $1.3 million drawdown during calendar year 21 to your reserves. Can you tell me what are your total current reserves under your health plan, and what are your total current reserves under your work comp plan?
I have that up, Valerie, if you want me to go ahead and share that. Thank you, committee members. With respect to the Albuquerque Public Schools fiscal year and ending reserve balance under our benefit budget is $17,429,535.04. So on the property and liability, hold on one second. Property and liability, we're at 7.8 million, and under workers' comp, we're ending balance 6,725,457. And those are all actuarially funded, as I mentioned during my presentation, at the 90% confidence level.
Okay, so that was pretty quick. Your work comp was $6,725,000 plus?
Sorry, $16,275,457.
And under your health plan?
So under the health plan, $17,429,353.14, or 4 cents, sorry.
Thank you very much. I was just trying to understand a 1.3 million drawdown. I wanted to know what the balance was to understand what that actual impact was. And I'm curious on NMCA, of those same two numbers, what is your current balance under your work comp and then under your health plan?
Mr. Chair, Representative, our recently audited fund balances as of June 30th for our health benefits fund was 31.6 million, and for our risk fund, which includes property liability and workers' comp, that was 7.1 million.
I'm sorry, the last one was 7.1 million, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Thank you for that. I quite honestly was expecting a little bit larger reserve balance for the work comp, but be that as it may, I don't know that I fully understand this program. So I had one other question on for Mr. Tyndall. On your slide presentation, your risk presentation on page 2, item 35 and 41 have to do with auto liability and auto physical damage. And as I looked at those and we heard the conversations about the impact of COVID to our insurance and everything like that, I remember I've gotten 4 months in a row, I've gotten a credit on my auto policy insurance from my carrier. And so number one, my question is, are you self-insured under your liability and your physical damage, or do you have an underwriter that's underwriting those risks for you? And if you have an underwriter, are they giving you a credit based on the stay-at-home orders that are being issued by the governors around the country, such as my insurance is? I thought it was a really neat program that I'm actually getting a credit. I get a letter in the mail once a month saying you're going to get X amount of credit this month because we know you're not driving as much. So is that impacting the state as well?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I would love to get a rebate. We're actually self-insured for those programs. So there's nobody to give us a rebate.
Okay, so you don't just pass the check around the office then, huh? Thank you for that. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On to that, Mr. Post.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Crowder, thanks for bringing these two issues up. The credits you're getting was a direct result of our office contacting all of the auto insurers and saying, we have reduced driving, we have fewer accidents, we have fewer cars on the road, and we expect you to provide reductions in premiums. And the total of that reduction so far has been in excess of $67 million. And we're looking at whether or not we should do that again this fall because we're still seeing reduced mileage. And you asked a question about, Senator, about workers' comp. This doesn't apply to the schools, of course, but we just approved a 1% reduction in workers' comp premiums for the business community.
Thank you for that information. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Additional questions from committee members? Mark, I noticed on your presentation on your risk management division on the cost of defense, you alluded to using outside contractors, I believe. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, that is correct. A majority of the defense provided through risk management is done by outside counsel.
How do they get on your contract list?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
How do they get on your contract list?
Through a competitive bid process. We issue a request for proposal periodically, and it's a competitive bid process. Some we take, some we don't. And some choose to want to participate and some don't. But it's all done through state purchasing with an RFP process.
Okay. Mark, do you have any legislative members that are attorneys are on your list?
Mr. Chair, I should know that off the top of my head, but I do not. I don't know for sure if we do or not. I'll let Connor know. Me and Jacob will go through the list and see.
Okay, I would like that provided to our staff. I'm not implying any wrongdoing. I'm just implying there's an appearance there when you have a citizen legislature, and I think this all needs to be disclosed from that standpoint. Would be interested also, not just individuals that are there, but firms that they work for from that standpoint. And I'd like to have that information. I guess the same goes to the Albuquerque Public Schools. On that policy, on their risk side, Valerie, do we have any attorneys that are serving in the legislature doing any contract work for you?
Todd, I'll let you answer that
Yeah,
one.
I could take that. To my knowledge, I do not believe so. And Mike Brown is shaking his head too, so no, we do not.
Okay, and I guess it goes to the Public School Insurance Authority on contract attorneys. Do we have any legislative members?
Mr. Chair, no, we do not. We did last year have Walsh Gallegos that was on our list. However, Representative Trujillo did not work on our account.
On who?
On our account, Representative Trujillo, who's no longer with the legislature.
Okay, from that. You know, I think this information needs to be very much upfront from that. I hate turning on the television and seeing about my colleagues. I think it's best to disclose on the front door. I think that's one of the flaws with a citizen legislature from that standpoint, and not only in this arena, but in other arenas. We have legislative members that have contracts with the state or work for companies that have contracts with the state, and I think the appearance is atrocious. I'm a little bit concerned with response saying, you know, being a little vague as far as not to my knowledge. From that standpoint, I would like to have a more precision answer in that area. If we could get that on that, I think it's absolutely necessary that we move forward with that type of information. Throughout my 32 years of serving, right there, I can't believe how late my headlights were to come on with what's going on, and everyone has areas, I guess, that they don't want to read about, but it's certainly legal for what they're doing. I know in the appraisal business, I've tried to give up working for universities that I used to do a lot of appraisal work for, because I was on the other end of helping that appropriation to the universities, not for appraisals, but in general. And I didn't want the appearance of conflict on that. I think contract attorneys certainly need to be surfaced. We had instance in the past where that it would not play well if it was picked up for a television story or a newspaper article on how that plays, and so let's get all that information out front and to at least try and mitigate the appearance of wrongdoing. Thank you very much for the presentation on that, and I think we're ready to move on to the next category. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Right. Yeah. Okay, do we have Ken Ortiz on?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, could you, we're under tab D, but can you speak a little closer to the microphone, Ken?
Is this better, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm going to ask Director Silva to share with me the presentation that you have. Mr. Chairman, let me know when you're ready for me to.
We can hear you, but
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me okay?
yes, we can.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get started if that's okay with you.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Legislative Finance Committee. My name is Ken Ortiz, and I'm the Cabinet Secretary of the General Services Department. With me today as a co-presenter is Anna Silva, who is the Director of our Facilities Management Division. Before we get started, I want to thank you for the opportunity to update you on GSD's master plan for state-owned facilities in the Santa Fe area. In the fall of 2019, GSD contracted with Architectural Research Consultants, otherwise known as ARC, to conduct a master plan of GSD state-owned facilities, to provide an assessment of each state-owned facility, and provide recommendations to leverage our state facilities based on each state agency's current office needs and future requirements. ARC, as you may know, has served as the master plan consultant for the Capitol Buildings Planning Commission for the past 20 years and has recently assisted GSD in developing a statewide inventory of facilities for all state-owned facilities in New Mexico and developed a system that is now used in our SHARE system to provide a location code for every government employee on where their office is actually located. This location coding is a federal Department of Labor requirement where every state is required to have a record of where every government employee is located by facility. And now New Mexico is able to comply with this federal requirement. I would also like to thank Mr. John Petronas, President of ARC, and Mr. Andy Aguilar with ARC, who have been working on this master plan and are with us today for this presentation. Anna, go ahead and turn it to slide 2, please. For this project, we focused on 29 state-owned facilities in Santa Fe, which are located in 5 campuses throughout the city. In total, the 29 state facilities comprise of over 1.5 million square feet. The scope of work also included reviewing all third-party leases in Santa Fe, which comprise over an additional 450,000 square feet at an annual cost of $10.5 million. The project began in November 2019, and the estimated completion date is January 2021. Each executive agency was surveyed for this master plan on their current office needs, including identifying short-term requests along with future office requirements by agency. The master plan will provide recommendations to maximize the use of our state-owned facilities with the goals or opportunities to, number one, co-locate agencies with similar clients and services within a facility, make the most efficient use of existing state-owned inventory, and opportunities to consolidate agencies that have multiple office locations in Santa Fe into a central location where feasible. Next slide, please. Some of the opportunities that this master plan is focusing on is the ability to co-locate agencies with similar clients and services to better serve the public and making it more convenient to New Mexicans to visit one location for assistance. An opportunity to have an agency under one roof where feasible instead of the current mixture of multiple locations throughout Santa Fe. Also to determine what is the reasonable percentage of third-party lease space for the state to maintain, the ability to understand the impact of office use, identify the needs and requirements for teleworking opportunities based on each agency's business model and requirements, not only within the current COVID pandemic, but what it may look like in a post-COVID world. And finally, to provide a roadmap for the state on the best use of future capital investment the state will allocate for either building remodels and renovations. Next slide, please. This slide, which is slide 4, is a reflection of a slight decline in the total state government employment from 2008 through current, where the state government employment has trended down at a negative 1.4% rate since 2008, with a high of a total state government positions filled at approximately 26,000 jobs filled to just over 21,000 in 2019. Meanwhile, the state of New Mexico's population has actually increased slightly at 0.48%. This graph is an illustration of some of the information we are using to determine what the state government trends have been as far as employment, what the current office needs are, in addition to projecting forward what future office needs are for each state agency. And Mr. Chairman, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Director Silva, who will continue the presentation. And then after that, Director Silva.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm just trying to move forward in our presentation. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Anna Silva, and I am the Director of the Facilities Management Division. Our master plan process consisted of our consultants physically walking each facility to assess space. Our consultants also surveyed the leadership of 32 executive branch agencies in both leased and state space, as Secretary Ortiz mentioned. We'll talk more about this survey a little bit later in our presentation. When conducting our master plan, our focus again was on our existing inventory and assessing how conducive our inventory was to accommodate consolidation of agencies and opportunities for relocating agencies from leased space to state space. What we found was that our state space provided limited opportunities. The results of our master plan thus far found that only half of our buildings are suitable or even possible to renovate to accommodate agency consolidation and achieve optimum space utilization. We also found that we lacked available consolidated transition space for agencies to reside during building upgrades and renovations. Lack of this type of space makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to renovate and can add costs of a project to move an agency to a short-term lease in order to renovate. Our facilities had additional complications such as age, original design, and building footprint, which complicates optimum space utilization. For example, some of our buildings, such as the Baton, could not be renovated based on the current design and footprint. Our master plan did, however, identify some suitable or best building candidates for renovations. These buildings were the Para and the Apodaca building. Both buildings are sufficiently large, have suitable footprints, and lend themselves to creating flexible office environments for the future. We will discuss these opportunities in a moment. When looking at agencies and their leases, 17 agencies occupy leased facilities in Santa Fe, paying a total of $10.5 million per year. These leases vary in price and are at varying stages in their lease contracts. FMD is currently working with several agencies on their short and long-term space utilization plans. Through our master planning efforts, we have found that some lease space is not only desirable, but it is definitely inevitable. This is due to the fact that we just don't have enough state-owned space. As you saw in previous slides, we are at capacity. We have more demand than supply, and we are at a 98% occupancy. State space is also needed because there is a necessity for public interface that state-owned space currently cannot provide. There is also a need to address unanticipated short-term needs with no current state-owned space available or for capital funds either. And lastly, some agencies benefit from leasing due to federal reimbursements for lease costs. So let's talk a little bit about our survey as part of our master planning efforts. The survey had two sections. The first section included general questions such as need for special space requirements, special location requirements, beyond general office space, any additional significant changes they are anticipating in the next 10 years. Additional questions were, what opportunities do they see to promote economies of scale to achieve more cost-effective space operations, as well as opportunities for consolidating functions and co-locating with other agencies. Section 2 of the survey was a self-evaluation of the adequacy of their existing space. Each agency was asked to rate as either excellent, good, fair, or poor their each individual location. Questions were based on location, amount of space, ability to meet functional requirements, how space was organized, the condition of the space, access by public and other users, and availability of parking. Both sections allowed for comments on each topic. Out of the 30 agencies that responded, in general, agencies in leased space expressed higher levels of satisfaction than agencies in state-owned space. There were multiple contributing factors. They didn't like the location. There was not enough space. They did not like the way space was organized. Or there was insufficient parking for either staff or the public. The results of the survey ranked each of our facilities. One of the buildings with our poorest rating was the Sims building, and one of the buildings with the highest overall rating was Baton and Concha Ortiz y Pino. So where are we now and where are we going? The COVID pandemic restrictions are still in place and have greatly impacted the use of state-owned facilities. The pandemic has called into question long-standing space use policies and assumptions about future demand for office space. In the short term, reoccupancy of state-owned and leased buildings will require a number of operational measures and physical changes to ensure the health and safety of state personnel and the public from infection. When we look at reoccupancy, we looked at several scenarios. Scenario 1 was reoccupancy based on pre-pandemic practices. This is where we would go back to normal based on pre-pandemic, what it used to be like. This is very unlikely. COVID has forced us into a new normal. Scenario 2 is the new normal, assumes there is a paradigm shift on how buildings are to be used in the future. The future is still unknown at this point, but we can make a few assumptions. There will likely be some sort of teleworking. What that looks like, we just don't know right now. Space standards will likely change based on desire for more space between workers in an open concept environment. There might be more hoteling space, more conference and meeting areas. The net result is while there are fewer people on site, more space may be required per FTE. So through all our efforts, what are we doing? As I mentioned earlier, there were some buildings we identified as best candidates for renovation and opportunities for consolidation in a facility. One of those buildings is the Para building. We are currently working with the Office of the Superintendent of Insurance to consolidate them onto one floor of the Para building from the 4 floors that they currently occupy. We are also working with CYFD and ECECD to consolidate them in the Para building. We are also in the process of moving both of these agencies from lease space to state space in Para. Through these efforts, we will cluster agencies based on the types of services they provide. And we will also increase the capacity of this building and save the state in lease costs. So what are the takeaways and next steps? We have learned that only half of our buildings in Santa Fe are suitable for any type of renovation to accommodate agency consolidation. We have also learned that there is a huge demand for state-owned space, which is why we will continue to have to rely on lease space. At 98% occupancy, we are at maximum capacity in our state-owned facilities. We have identified agencies that serve the same customers and provide like services and are ideal for clustering in the facility. And in order to exercise our master plan, we have identified criteria that must be met in order for this effort to be realized. So where are we with the master plan and what is the timeline? ARC is about 85% complete with this master plan. Tasks still needing to be complete are facilitating the physical condition of each building, completing the recommendations on space use strategies based on concept plans for facilities and properties. They need to complete the recommendations on an implementation plan with conceptual cost estimates associated with relocation and transitional space. And as Secretary Ortiz mentioned earlier, ARC is scheduled to have this master plan completed by the first of the year. In the meantime, our focus will be to continue to work with agencies on their individual program needs and their space utilization and long-term plans, and help facilitate strategies to promote programmatic consolidation. With that, that concludes our presentation, and I'll turn it back over to Secretary Ortiz.
Thank you, Director Silva. Mr. Chairman, that concludes our presentation, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Senator Munoz, you're first.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and Ken, I just had a few questions. Since you built this master plan, and I think ERB was in front of one of my committees or this committee, they are talking about moving to a new building and remodeling. Have you guys put them on a hold list until we figure out how much square footage they're going to need and how we're going to deal with the COVID?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Munoz, that's a very good question. The Executive Director, Jan Goodwin, has contacted us, and they have, so we've sat down with them a couple of times in late 2019. We haven't met with them this year, but they indicated that their desire is to actually build a building. They're willing to work with us, and it's an ongoing conversation. So we haven't touched base recently, partly due to the pandemic, but I appreciate your inquiry and your interest on that. And I could touch base with her, Senator, and report back through either staff or directly to you any updates with what they're looking at as far as actually either purchasing or building a new building.
Yeah, and Madam Chair and Ken, so on all these, when you did this assessment, the States and Villages assessment, did you look at that across the board and say, okay, CYFD needs a new building in Gallup, or CYFD needs a new building here? Did you place everybody on a hold until we see what funding we have and then see what size square footages? And to bring CYFD back into the conversation, we gave them a bunch of money a couple of years ago, and they overbought a building. And so I don't know how many extra square footage, but it was over 50,000 I think they had left over that they weren't going to use in Albuquerque. So have you jerked back the reins in on a lot of those and said, okay, we're not going to expand or increase or do anything until that? And that's the first part of my question. The second part is going to PRA, not PRA, the one across the street, PRC. the PRC, they're moving out of the building across the street, and it's my understanding the early childhood is moving in there. But how many employees do they have, and what's their capacity, and how are you reviewing the PRC's lease, or where are they moving their square footage to, and how are you looking at that? Because, and I've talked, and there's a different method that's coming about office space.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, first part of your question related to buildings and agencies throughout New Mexico. So we're doing a couple of things, Mr. Chairman, Senator Munoz, is we are sitting down and meeting with every single agency and reviewing all of the third-party leases. So with the intent of possibly co-locating agencies with similar clients and services to ensure that across New Mexico, our constituents can go to one central place for like-minded services. So we're reviewing leases that are expiring in the next year or so, and we're seeing what other agencies may have room in their current location, partly due to some telecommuting options where some agencies are reporting higher productivity, higher employee satisfaction, to see if we could minimize our footprint and ultimate cost. So that's been ongoing, and Director Silva, myself, and her staff have been meeting with them, understanding their future requirements. We're also, as far as looking at the state as a big picture holistically, is we have a request coming through the capital outlay program to expand our master plan. So this presentation was only for the Santa Fe area. We really want to request and do a statewide master plan to really understand what facilities state-owned that we have throughout New Mexico that we could better maximize and utilize, and also look at agencies going forward. Now, as far as the second part of your question, one of the main incentives of bringing in the early childhood education and care department is to partner up and co-locate with CYFD, because ultimately they serve the same clientele, and we thought for better communication, coordination, etc., it would be best to have them co-located. So we provided PRC with a 6-month notice to basically find another location. We've been in communication, coordination with them, working with them on that. And a 6-month notice we felt was adequate time, because we typically see from basically soup to nuts, it takes about 90 days for an agency to provide to us what we call a space needs questionnaire that identifies office needs, office layout, what type of security, conference rooms, break rooms, etc. So that way we could put out an RFP and find the best location at the lowest cost price for the agencies. So the deadline for them to move out was September 30th. I understand that the Chief of Staff, he reported to the Board of Finance a couple of weeks ago that they were able to find a location in downtown Santa Fe, and they're currently transitioning from the Para building into that new lease space. Hope I answered all your questions, Senator. If not, please let me know.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I just have one or two more. So when the PRC did make that move, I don't know what state rate or if the agency paid anything in the building they're currently occupied, but now they moved to downtown Santa Fe, and what is that rent rate and what was that cost compared to? And then you said that CYFD and the early childhood are now going to move into where the PRC was, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Munoz, let me clarify. CYFD was partially in there in the Para already, but they also had some third-party leased space in Santa Fe. So those additional staff in the third-party lease space will be transitioning into the Para building. And then the newly created Early Childhood and Education Care Department will be joining them within the Para building. As far as the lease cost for the PRC, I'm going to turn it over to Director Silva if she has any information on that. Director Silva, can you provide any update on any type of cost for the PRC is going?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Secretary Ortiz, and Senator Munoz. The PRC negotiated their lease directly, and FMD was not a part of those negotiations. So I am not aware of the price that they're paying per square foot.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
All righty, I don't think we have anyone else that has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To me, we are in the very situation when we have more office space, commercial office space out there in the state, probably for lease, than we've ever had, with so many people moving out of this office space and working at home. So I know that this is a very long-term plan, but certainly in the short run, there should be plenty of office space to lease, and it should be at a fair market value, I would think. Just a comment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, Senator, is there anyone else that would like to ask a question? Not seeing any. Let me thank you for your presentation, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, it was great to see you. Looking forward to meeting you and seeing you again in person. Thank you for the opportunity once again.
All righty, thank you. I think we'll go ahead and move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the Information Technology Project Status Report. Jessica, go ahead.
Madam Chair, may I introduce Jessica?
Absolutely, David.
This is Ms. Jessica Hitzman, and this is her first appearance before the committee. She started with LFC this summer as an intern with the evaluation unit. She is a graduate of Highland High School in Albuquerque and UNM and is completing a master's in public policy degree this year. And she is a half-time analyst on information technology. So we're glad to have her. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members of the committee. As David mentioned, my name is Jessica Hitzman, and I am the new LFC analyst for the Department of Information Technology. Thank you. Today, we will be going over IT project status reports. So if you'll please turn to your binder in tab E as in elephant. And in that tab, you will see a summary of my presentation here today, as well as the agency IT report cards, which we will be going into detail during this presentation. I do want to let you know that we will be skipping around this document just a little bit because we will be going over the projects in order of risk today. So if you could please start out on the first page of the report cards. Currently, we have 10 IT projects under review for the fourth quarter of FY20, and of those projects, a majority are currently at risk. The project that is currently not at risk is on page 1, and this project is DeWitt's Statewide Infrastructure Replacement and Enhancement Project, or SWIRE. This project is rated green and is on track for completion within scope and budget originally defined. SWIRE has provided infrastructure and equipment upgrades to towers and other infrastructure for public safety communications statewide. Moving throughout the report, you will see that 4 projects are currently rated red, with significant issues that could limit the success of the project. Corrective action for these projects will be needed to ensure that the project will fulfill its intended purpose. Though rated red, this does not indicate project failure, but does indicate a need for monitoring and oversight to ensure that the project will be on track. If you will please turn to page 2 of your reports. I will be going over high-risk IT projects. High-risk projects will require management attention or corrective action to ensure functionality. On page 2, you will see DeWitt's P25 Digital Public Safety Radio Systems Upgrade Project. This is meant to convert the state's analog public safety communication system to digital. The project is set to complete in FY26 and is 17% over budget from the original project estimates. However, the current phase is on track to complete in FY22. The project still lacks a strategic plan, proper governance, and project management. all of which make this a high-risk project. Moving on to the next project, please turn to page 3. DoIT has yet to establish a project manager for its enterprise cybersecurity upgrade project, and the project is already delayed from a long recruiting timeline for a state chief information security officer. However, DoIT is currently seeking certification of funds for project management. The project has an estimated completion date of FY24, but with teleworking and increased remote government work, cybersecurity threats have grown, and the need to address these threats has also grown as a result. LFC staff are preparing a more detailed memo on cybersecurity, and more information about this project will be coming to you within the next month. Moving on to the next project, if you will please turn to, we're going to skip a couple pages and go to page 7, please. Page 7 shows the Human Services Department's Medicaid Management and Information Systems Replacement Project, or MISR. This is a federally required system to manage the state's Medicaid enterprise. The project is within budget, but is at high risk due to the complexity, the high cost, schedule delays, and the project's reliance on continued 90% federal funding matches. The project completion date was recently extended about 2 years until FY23 to award a contract for project management services, which the project has been without since May of 2016. Brenda Fresquez, my predecessor, did an evaluation on MISR in May 2020 and identified the need for best practices in organizational change management, but HSD has yet to report whether they have completed this change management plan. However, the agency has made progress by submitting quarterly status reports and communicating updates to stakeholders as LFC has previously recommended. Moving on to the next project on page 8, please. The Children, Youth, and Family Department's Comprehensive Child Welfare Information System, or CWIS project, is also a federally mandated system that is at high risk of falling further behind schedule and going further over budget. However, CYFD is still working to meet requirements for federal approval of the project. Without approval, $12.3 million in requested federal funding for FY22 for the project could be in jeopardy, an amount that the state would otherwise have to cover. Risks to this federal financial participation and the overall system's complexity leave the CWIS project at high risk. If you will please turn back to page 4, we will go on to projects that are at moderate risk. On page 4, you will see DoIT's rural broadband project has showed improvements to the schedule and risk in the fourth quarter after delivering the state broadband strategic plan in June of 2020. The broadband project is intended to maximize availability of broadband across the state's rural areas. However, lack of a project manager and exorbitant cost estimates outlined within the strategic plan do pose risk to project progress. Moving on to the next project on page 5, please. The State Land Office is currently within budget for their Royalty Administration and Revenue Processing System, or RAPS. This system will be significant to tracking and generating state revenue from oil and natural gas. The schedule status continued to pose risk in the fourth quarter given delays for software testing. Implementation is expected to be no earlier than November of 2020, and the schedule should be monitored for further delays. However, despite these delays, the agency continues to generate and distribute state revenues on time. If you will please turn to page 6 for our next project. The Human Services Department's Child Support Enforcement System Replacement, or CSER project, is also within budget but behind schedule. The system will help HSD better meet federal performance measures related to child support enforcement. HSD is reevaluating the project timeline to accommodate more federal investment partners. An estimated date of completion is still being determined, leaving the project at risk. We will skip to page 9 for our next yellow rated project. which is the Correction Department's Offender Management System Replacement Project. This is intended to replace the 15-year-old current system with a new web-based solution. The project has received adequate funding, but schedule delays have contributed to project risk. Project completion is estimated for FY21, leaving the project behind original schedule of 2019. Moving on to our next project, will be on page 10. The Department of Public Safety's record management system has improved since the third quarter after securing extensions for previously appropriated funds. DPS has secured vendors for independent verification and validation services, as well as project management. But given the complexity of integrating this system within the agency, continued work with the project steering committee will likely be required. If you will please turn to page 11. Another IT project of concern is the Regulation and Licensing Department's Excella Replacement Project. This project is at high risk due to an extended timeline and resource constraints reported by the agency. However, RLD has shown progress by finalizing vendor contracts for project management. If you will please turn to page 12. This lists projects that are in post-implementation, or in other words, projects that have completed but are still being assessed through the department. These projects have reported no changes to functionality this quarter. The State Treasury Office's Share Integrated Treasury Solutions project did not meet the needs of the agency given continued reliance on the old system for investment reporting. Other modules are being used, but no plan for fixing software design flaws has been reported. Moving on to the next project, which is still on page 12. The Department of Health reports its WIC system replacement is fully operational, completed on time but over budget. The agency has corrected and validated a majority of its reports, but overall impacts of this validation are unclear at this time. In May of last year, Program Evaluation Unit at the LFC looked at the WIC program in New Mexico and found several deficiencies in the system, as well as an overall underutilization of the program by eligible participants. Because the system deals with vulnerable populations, being able to report on benefits effectively is of high concern. Finally, if you will please turn to page 13, the CYFD Enterprise Provider Information Constituent Services Project, or EPICS for short, is still pending closeout. While some elements of the EPICS system are working, the agency did not consolidate all the databases into EPICS as they had originally planned. This was likely due to lack of project governance and planning early on identified by the LFC. Overall, since several IT projects have demonstrated risk due to a lack of project management and program support, ensuring this project governance will be essential for completing further project milestones. Given LFC's concerns about securing continued federal funds, additional attention will need to be paid to projects requesting these funds to limit delays and ensure that proper approval is granted prior to implementation. Projects that are moderate to low risk will need to be monitored to ensure that risk status is not escalated. And high-risk projects should demonstrate plans to mitigate this risk in FY21, either through corrective action, like reevaluating a project's strategic plan, or increasing oversight and attention. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I will now stand for questions.
Thank you very much. Let's go to Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, I've got a few quick questions to go through, and I'm going to refer to the pages start with page 7. And if we could, let's see, page 7. Madam Chairman, this is an ongoing project, and my question is this: did I understand this project, all $166,413,000 doesn't have a manager? Did I misunderstand that?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Anderson. Given that the project has been ongoing for quite some time, I do have information to suggest that project management is still in progress. So with the information that I have been given so far, I believe that that is correct, but I can definitely double check with the agency and get you a final answer on that.
Thank you very much. I certainly subscribe to the importance of this particular information system, but it's always been a concern to me because the price tag is so many times more than any other ongoing project. I would ask that it's my recollection that the total ticket on this was once referred to in a previous committee of over $200 million, and I see that this then is not reflecting all-in costs for this particular information system.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Representative Anderson, I believe that that is correct. I believe that the numbers that you are seeing in your funds will be, so when you see the $166 million that you are referring to, that is what's been appropriated to date. However, in the top right corner of this same page, you will see the total estimated cost, which is that $211 million. So I believe that is correct.
Thank you very much for pointing that out, because that was the number I was trying to tie to. Madam Chairman, my question on this particular information system is New Mexico the first state of all 50 that is developing this Medicaid information system, or are we somewhere down the pecking order?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Anderson, I believe that we are one of the first. That is correct.
Thank you very much for that. Then my final question on this, is there any doubt about the 90% match going forward, or is that something we must worry about in every installment?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Representative Anderson. We believe that that 90% match is a standard IT match for Medicaid. So we believe that that match will continue.
Thank you very much for those answers. And with that, Madam Chairman, I will conclude my questions.
Righty, thank you, Representative. Do we have anyone else that would like to ask a question? Okay, Representative Crowder.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to make a comment. That was probably the most outstanding presentation I've ever heard of such a depressing outcome. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Growler. I appreciate that.
Right, is there anyone else that'd like to ask a question? If not, we'd like to thank you for the presentation and welcome aboard. Glad to have you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, representatives. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And if we'll go ahead and move on to the next item, which is the LFC progress report on Centennial Care. Jacob.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Before Jacob gets started, we just wanted to introduce a new staffer to the evaluation unit, Katie Dry, who's sitting over here on the side. Many of you likely know Katie from her work at the Santa Fe Community Foundation or United Way of Santa Fe. Before that, she was a graduate of Wesleyan, and we're really happy to have her. She's been working on this Medicaid project with Jacob and a subsequent one that you all will have ready for you in November. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Jacob Roberry, a program evaluator. I'm going to take about 10 minutes to go over the progress report on the Centennial Care waiver and managed care costs. It's under tab F in your binders and should look like this. For this presentation, I'm going to be referencing the summary slides, but the progress itself is also located after the slides there. I'd also like to go ahead and thank Secretary Scrace, Medicaid Director Nicole Como, who I believe is joining us virtually here to answer questions at the end, and HSD staff for their collaborative approach on this report. Turning over to slide 2, Centennial Care is the state's Medicaid managed care program, and the state contracts with managed care organizations, MCOs, to coordinate and deliver healthcare services to beneficiaries. A key element of managed care is MCOs are paid a fixed monthly rate per enrollee and assume a financial risk if the member costs exceed the financial fixed payment amounts. Centennial Care came into being on January 1st, 2014, and ran through the end of 2018 under its first iteration. It's important to note that Centennial Care program continues today under the Centennial Care 2.0 version, but this progress report is really a retrospective look at that first iteration. And as John mentioned, we'll be back here in November to present an update on that 2.0 version. So this progress report follows up on key findings of the LFC's 2015 program evaluation with updated data and information. The key findings from that evaluation were that there were growing costs to the Medicaid program with lower than originally projected cost savings, the inability to determine trends in the amount of care enrollees were receiving, and the additional need for budgetary detail and control by the legislature. If you'll turn with me now to slide 3. As you can see in the graph on slide 3 there, Centennial Care costs grew from about $3.9 billion in 2014 to $4.6 billion in 2017 before coming down slightly there in 2018. And it's important to note that the Medicaid expansion was occurring concurrently here in 2018 as the Centennial Care program was beginning. And this largely explains a lot of the increase that we're seeing in the overall program cost there. However, it's really important to note there's a whole lot of information going on behind the scenes here in this graph. And that per member per month data, which we can think of as per member spend, begins to shed a little bit of light on this here. And so as you can see, that per member spending originally increased from 2014 to 2015, before then decreasing and stabilizing in 2016. And this per member spending stabilization was largely due to HSD's provider rate cuts and rate freezes, which were implemented in FY17 as the state's financial situation was worsening there. So how was Centennial Care, how did it perform with regards to overall cost savings? The reality is they're largely unknown. CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, requires Medicaid offices to demonstrate budget neutrality through a series of calculations. And applying this methodology, we would see that there would actually be about $3.6 billion in savings attributed to the Centennial Care program over their 5 years. However, studies have shown that this CMS calculation drastically overstates cost-saving estimates and is not representative of true savings. And so what does this all really highlight? It highlights the fact that we need to have good benchmarks moving forward and to regularly analyze and monitor cost-saving potential for the Centennial Care program. Turning now over to slide 4. A key finding in that 2015 evaluation was for HSD to better negotiate with MCOs to the lower end of that actuarially sound rate range, which is calculated by HSD's actuary. And this appears to have mostly occurred. However, building off of a 2017 LFC health note, analysis shows that HSD could have saved about $93 million between 2014 and 2018 in general fund dollars if it had paid the MCOs at the lower bound of that actuarial sound rate range. It's important to note that HSD states that there are MCO differences in terms of its member characteristics and healthcare delivery systems, which then require MCOs to receive specifically adjusted rates. But the overarching point here is that negotiating lower rates does lead to cost savings. Turning now over to slide 5. So a key area of cost savings, a key area of cost savings under the Centennial Care Program was really just needed to come from care coordination. And care coordination is a key program element where the MCOs work with individual members to make sure that they're receiving appropriate treatments and receiving follow-up health care as needed. And this theoretically, should lead to members utilizing more costly acute care, such as emergency department visits and inpatient admissions, at a significantly lower rate. Between 2014 and 2018, care coordination cost the state around $575 million. And yet, what that yellow line there shows that we still have a large number of non-participating care coordination members, and those are individuals that are either declining care coordination or are unreachable, and this remained pretty high, around 70,000 members at the end of 2018. And each of these non-engaged members, represent a potential cost-saving opportunity for the state. Turning now over to slide 6. Healthcare utilization data and reporting really improved compared to when the first evaluation was done in 2015. And thinking back to that prior slide, what this enables us to now do is to see where some of these potential cost-saving opportunities could exist. Between 2013, which was a pre-Centennial Care year, and 2017, the number of members receiving preventive care visits actually decreased from 86% to 76%. And this is concerning, as a 2019 study found that annual well visits were associated with about a 6% reduction in future healthcare spending. So again, thinking back to those 70,000 members and how many may not be receiving annual well visits, and if we can push their numbers up to be seeing some of these potential cost-saving declines. Applying to that end, applying this savings estimate to the Centennial Care Program for 2018, it's estimated that perhaps we could have saved as much as $190 million therefore in 2018. Another key aspect of care coordination is to also be lowering ED visits and ED usage, and that's what this chart here on the screen shows. Is that we did see significant declines between 2015 and 2018, but there still is further ability for the MCOs to reduce their members' usage of ED visits, especially that one on the right-hand side, which is ED visits for non-emergent use. Lastly, turning to slide 7 here. Another key finding was that Centennial Care lacked strong legislative oversight out of that 2015 evaluation, and minimal changes to legislative oversight of the Medicaid program have occurred since 2015. And Medicaid continues to be budgeted under solely 2 line items, and this totals about $6 billion, for an FY20, with nearly $1 billion of that being part of the general fund. Other states, as was noted in the 2015 evaluation, as well as in this progress report, have a much more detailed Medicaid budgeting process, making appropriations at subcategory levels. It is important to note that HSD does hold quarterly meetings, Medicaid projection meetings with DFA and LFC staff to communicate details of the Medicaid budget as well as the program. But really overall, the legislature relies, as with many other programs and other agencies, on Accountability and Government Act performance measures to track Centennial Care performance. And from FY14 to FY18, the number of performance measures actually decreased from 8 to 7. Here in FY21, we're back to 8. And LFC staff continues to also stress the importance for more quarterly reporting rather than annual to increase legislative oversight and overall program transparency. And with that, Madam Chair, I stand for questions, and I believe we have HSD on the line as well to assist in questions.
All right, let me ask, is there any comment from HSD before we go to questions?
Madam Chair, thanks for the opportunity. I think it'd be better just to take questions, and if we could have that 2 minutes for closing comments, that would be great.
All right, let's start with Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll be short and That is going to this report on page 4. And on page 4, we're looking at, if you could help me with that again, we're looking at savings over a period of time from both physical and behavioral health. And what my question is this: if the savings on physical health is $31.8 million on 5.5 billion, and on behavioral health it's $21.8 million on $500 million, clearly there's a disproportionate amount of savings that is suggested to be come from behavioral health, where there has been a recent upheaval, not too many years past, and where I live, there's a rebuilding process going on because rural behavioral health was wiped out. And so I'm sort of looking at this and wondering if we're about to squeeze the air out of a surviving victim if we suggest that the bigger savings is to come out of behavioral health, not necessarily in total dollars, but in terms of relative percentage. It's a much greater percentage. Am I seeing that? Forget the part about breathing the air out, but is that a fair comparison, or is that an accurate comparison on the potential general fund saving?
Madam Chair, Representative Anderson, so embedded within this analysis, which built off of the 2017 health notes, so there are individual, the federal assistance medical percentages for each of these programs differs. So, I think you're correct in your interpretation in terms of the funds there. However, on a individual, on a member basis, it is a little bit different, as we would have to look at the individual FMAPs associated with each one of those programs.
Thank you for that answer, and I'm serious. You just went past my knowledge base relative to this subject. But then on page 7, I'm looking at the Centennial Care lacks strong legislative oversight. And again, I look at this I'm really nitpicking on this, but when I look at the pie chart for medical assistance and I look at the pie chart for Medicaid behavioral health and the size of the circles, I think, behavioral health got a disrepresentation because this suggests a much bigger pie for behavioral health relative to physical health, one being 5.5 billion and one being half a billion. So that's just a comment from my statistics class from many years ago. The last thing I was going to say, Madam Chairman, if I could, is on page 3, perhaps the alarming statement here is true cost savings of Centennial Care remain unknown. And that, to me, sort of disqualifies much of what I've discussed today relative to savings that can be wrung out of behavioral health or physical health for that matter. So I would be curious if Dr. Scrace has a comment on that. And with that, I'm done.
Yeah, Madam Chair and Representative Anderson, a great question. I wanted to emphasize a great point you made earlier too, and that is that it would be a grave error for anyone to evaluate the performance of the Medicaid program based on cost alone. What the people in New Mexico, what the legislature, and what I know the LFC staff press us on really is not cost, but it's value. And value is what people get for what that costs, and what people get is quality of care and access to care. So the point you made earlier about behavioral health, if there's no access, we can keep costs down in the short run, but you generate much more expensive costs with hospitalizations and very, very long-term institutional stays as well. In terms of the question about, in terms of behavioral health, a 10-to-1 ratio of dollars for physical to behavioral health is not unusual. It's fairly typical nationally. Could be a little bit higher in New Mexico because we have more than our fair share, if you will, of the percent or a higher percent of the population, particularly the Medicaid population, that has behavioral health disorders. And lastly, just on the unknown savings issue, which is really your question, I think we can do more to quantify it, but the way to tell how much you save is you have to perform a series of interventions and then hold all other variables constant. And since 2016, all other variables have not been constant. That creates a challenge. We're certainly in an environment right now where no variables are constant with the pandemic, and we're seeing dramatic increase in costs in one place and decrements in access and others, and trying to manage that. So, and as far as accountability, we are really open. We think that these 2.5, 3-hour meetings we have with the LFC every 3 months to go over line item detail of our budgets is the highest level of accountability we have, for just about anything. But if there's more we can do, of course, we'd be happy to do it.
Thank you very much for that answer, Madam Chairman. I'm done.
All righty, thank you, Representative. Let's go to Representative Garcia, and then we have Representative Crowder on deck.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 6, you said Centennial Care members received a preventive care visit decreasing from 86 to 76%. What caused that decrease? What was happening that it dropped down that much?
Madam Chair, Representative Garcia, the analysis that was done as part of that, didn't extend into the root cause analysis of why that decreased. This was actually done as part of Centennial Care's demonstration waiver evaluation that was being performed by Deloitte as part of their CMS requirements. So, and I think those are the exact type of questions, that we're trying to dig into deeper as part of the Centennial Care 2.0 evaluation as to why that is decreasing, because it is a concerning trend, and we'd like to see that increase. And again, there's a question there of how it's progressed from 2018 onwards.
Thank you for that. Madam Chair, one more question. Do you think, sir, that these urgent care centers that popped out that are in Albuquerque and Santa Fe, do they have anything to do with that drop?
Madam Chair, Representative Garcia, I could not speak to that as to what maybe some of the potential causes were, and if there was any type of a kind of substitute effect with other care clinics that may have impeded some of the percentages there. I think Deputy Director John Courtney may have a response for you.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and I know Secretary Scrace, it looks like he has a response too. He made a really good point earlier, Madam Chair and members, that nothing is necessarily being held constant over the years. And one of the things to keep in mind is that during Medicaid expansion, we were bringing in a new population, so to speak, and in theory, that population, as mostly childless adults, may have been healthier and may not have needed that. But that's something, as Jacob said, we're digging into a bit more, and then it looked like Secretary Scrace had something to add to that also.
Yeah, I think when I think about annual visits and well visits for kids and annual checkups, I personally believe that the number one constraint in our state is the number of primary care providers, doctors, nurse practitioners, physician assistants. We've been relying for many years on a healthcare workforce report that comes out of a legislatively sanctioned committee to produce that report. It has basically been counting the number of licenses to practice and not the number of hours people are spending in their practices. We're planning on presenting this to you, and we show you our budget in a couple months. But I think what we have found is we've taken the same exact data and looked at it from a hours per week or FTE perspective, if you will, rather than a head count. And we've found very significant shortages of primary care throughout the entire state. As we all know, when we try to get one of our relatives or one of our friends or one of our constituents in to see a primary care physician, we have a number of innovative efforts, some directly from the legislature to expand primary care. I don't think that's the subject today, and so I'll defer and keep you in suspense until our LFC budget presentation.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Representative Garcia. We have Representative Crowder with Senator Burt on deck.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are going to come from slide 4 of your presentation. My first question, I guess, or curiosity is, the phrase where it says negotiated rates between HSD and MCOs typically fell between the middle range and the low range. Are the MCOs nonprofits? Are they for-profits? Are those licensed doctors? Can you tell me who the MCOs are? Who are the managed care organizations?
Madam Chair, Representative Crowder, so under Centennial Care in this first iteration, we had 4 MCOs. So we had Blue Cross Blue Shield, Molina Healthcare, Presbyterian, and then United Healthcare Service, or United Healthcare. Currently, we have 3 MCOs with Molina and United Healthcare that were dropped out, replaced by Western Sky. So those are the MCOs that we have in the state currently.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies everything in my head right there. I do have on the long-term support services, seems to be in the middle of your chart there, seems to be the most expensive portion of this process. Can you speak to me a little bit about that and the cost per patient, or what's driving that to be higher than the behavioral health or physical health?
Madam Chair, Representative Crowder, HSD can correct me if I'm wrong, and I know, but I believe, the long-term services there, I think what's really driving that difference is that the FMAP percentage, which again is the portion that the federal share is paying, tends to be lower compared to some of those others for the long-term services. So it's driving up, to some extent, those general fund levels. But I would also, defer to HSD if they had any further insights on that. Well,
yeah, I could speak to that, Madam Chair. Madam Chair and Representative Crowder and others. Actually, Mr. Rodbury has a great table in the full interim evaluation. It's table 1. It's on page 5, and it kind of shows you, there's a column in there that has the different programs. It's a little hard to interpret, but it's the average per member per month expense. The slide that we're referring to on the screen here really is about savings. But so a typical Medicaid person, their healthcare costs run from $319 to $480, $500 per person per month. And the long-term support services, these are people generally eligible for both Medicaid and Medicare, and their costs, if you have that report on you, you can open to it, but it runs from $2,800 to $3,500, which spare you having to do the math yourself. It's 6 to 10 times more. Often these are people who reside in nursing homes that Medicaid pays for because they've spent down all their assets and they're now low-income individuals. When I teach at the university, I like to ask the question, whose idea was it that when Medicare was implemented in 1965, that Medicaid would pay for nursing home stays? And the answer to the question that students never get is no one. No one even thought of this when they developed Medicare and the Medicaid laws. And it has come to pass that actually Medicaid is by far the largest payer nationally for long-term care stays, people in nursing homes, not the skilled bed part, but the nursing homes as we think of them. So these are very high-cost individuals. The savings, we are seeing a decrease in per member per month costs, and so that's coming down a little bit, but that is why it's so expensive. You can imagine a mom with a couple kids between, let's say, 1 and 12, their Medicaid costs, even all 3 of them put together, much less than an elderly 88-year-old with multiple chronic conditions living in a nursing facility. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Scrace. I appreciate that explanation. It helps me understand the chart that I'm looking at, so thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, Senator Burt, you're up, and then we've got Senator Gonzalez after that. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that. And Dr. Straits, always enjoy your presentation. Appreciate the information. Looking at, and Randy kind of led us into this, the cost of the MCOs working with, and someone decided in the department to work at a little bit different level from the lowest level. I assume there was some reasoning for that. Can you explain when the decision was made? Because that $93 million is a lot of money.
It is. And I think what I'm going to do is, because I'm sort of hogging the airtime here, I'm going to let Nicole just talk briefly about what the CMS requirements are for us to maintain our program, which means maintain the federal match we get when it comes to actuarially sound rate limits. And I'm going to go into why we don't always keep it at the bottom of the range. Nicole?
Thank you, Secretary, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Good to be with you all today. Yeah, we work with our contracted actuaries and are required by CMS to have actuarially sound rates always when we establish how we're going to pay the MCOs. I think one of the things that's critical to speak about in the report here is that while we establish those rates, we also then have to take into consideration another set of risk factors. So, for example, if one of our MCOs was more highly had a higher number of patients that were using UNM for their services. Those patients are usually going there because they're specialty services. It's our teaching hospital here in the state. And those patients tend to be what we refer to them as higher acuity. They're therefore more costly to us. So we have to adjust the rates for those MCOs to not just be what our average is, but to also add on these risk factors for when we have a higher acuity population that they're seeing. That's done over a year. There's a lot of back and forth and reconciliation that makes that possible, but that does sometimes skew what's represented here in these reports to make it seem as though the overall rates that were paid were higher, when actually it may just be some rates for a specific set of population or one of the MCOs that may be above that rate range. So again, CMS requires that we keep them all within actuarially sound requirements. And then I think Dr. Straits is going to talk about what it means when we go to the lower end of that bound and why it's something we're really cautious about.
Yeah, Madam Chair and members of the committee and Senator Burt, good question. So one last thing to add to Nicole's comments, that we use Mercer to validate these actuarially sound rate ranges, and they have to sign off on them, so we can't proceed without that signature from them. We send it to CMS. The reason it's a range is because we can't predict the future. If, number one, if we knew how much every single person costs, we could just set the rates for the MCOs at exactly what it was going to cost, and be done with that. On the issue of the lower end of the rate range, if we just paid them exactly at the lower end of the rate range, my belief is we could put no risk in the system. There would be no ability to enforce incentives. So, for example, $93 million, as you said, is a lot of money. I completely agree. Currently, we have $100 million in risk for the MCOs. They have to meet quality targets in behavioral health visits. Half of all the measures we switched over the past year, 50 million to behavioral health related metrics, some behavioral health quality metrics, and then others, regular physical health metrics as well. We have telemedicine in there. Great call in advance to incentivize telemedicine use before the pandemic even started. But we could, so let's take the example where today all the MCOs are at that lower end of the rate range, and it turns out they don't meet any of their targets. We can take the $100 million back from them, but then we have to give it back again because we have to keep their total payment within that rate range. And so we like to have some room, and we're actually moving toward a world where even more of their payments are based on those incentives. And so And then the last thing is, retrospect, it's easier to calculate how much we could have saved retrospectively. It's not as easy to calculate going forward. And so at the very bottom of the rate range, if somebody, if there was a slight fine or penalty, it would just be canceled out because we are required to pay them a certain amount per person per month. And then the last thing, just to make this more complicated, but I don't mean to do that. I don't remember how many rate range cells there are, but I think it's in the, do you know, Nicole? In the 80s maybe? But each of these populations has all these different age groups, and so there's this giant spreadsheet with a different rate in every single cell that's based on prior utilization and prior costs. And so I actually, and so it's impossible to predict all those little ones as well. I actually think the way to save money in Medicaid is more accountability to the MCOs, holding them more firmly to their contracts, applying those performance penalties, but to do that we need room so that we're not right at the bottom. And I hope that was clear. It is really complicated. I'm not an actuary, neither is Director Como, and we could always bring one to a future event. Thank you.
Well, Madam Chair and Mr. Secretary, I appreciate the explanation. A little deep, but it is interesting that from what I perceive from the comments, you're working off a little bit more of a business type model rather than a government by the rate structure model, which again, as a private sector guy, I can appreciate. I guess my other question, Madam Chair, would be, Mr. Secretary, knowing full well that we're dealing with the pandemic and knowing full well where our budget woes sit for the state at this point in time, and knowing that as we get to January, we may have to look at further cuts just to get through this budgetary year. Will you reconsider some of those MCOs or how you have them racked and stacked with regards to contracting them for maybe at a lower rate than you have in the past, or looking at specific issues that you may have to send to a little bit higher rate? I guess I'm asking, are you going to evaluate that again? Because we're going to have a tough time looking at finishing up the 21 budget. Then we got to figure out a 22 budget, and I just think, I don't know how we're going to do that, quite frankly. We just don't have the money. So I didn't know if you're going to look at reevaluate the thing or give us some guidance and direction on what your plan is.
Madam Chair and Senator Byrd and everyone else, I'm going to let Nicole start here, and I'll clean up this time.
Thank you, Secretary, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So we are looking at this. We certainly are concerned about the budget and our outlook heading into 21 and 22. So we've gone through a pretty rigorous cost containment exercise where we've outlined everywhere where we might be able to engage in some cost containment and find savings. We have looked at the MCOs in that exercise, and this example in particular, we've identified that if we in 21 moved the MCOs to the bottom of the rate range, we'd capture about $8 million in general fund savings. And so we are looking at other options. There's some other ways that we can look to control costs with the MCOs as well. An example of that is around administrative costs that they may have in care coordination, which I think is also mentioned in the LFC report as well. So we're looking at those items. What we want to be really cautious of, I agree with you, is that we're not quite sure how we'll get to establishing this budget, and what we want to be cautious of is that if we do end up having to make any reductions to provider rates, that we watch the reductions that we make to the MCOs. Obviously, if the MCOs had huge profits, there might be more places to cut. But we only have 3 MCOs, as Mr. Roberry mentioned, and only one of those is currently profitable. And they are not profitable enough to exceed the 3% cap that we have on those profits. So once our MCOs make 3% of profit, we start sharing, and whatever they make above that, But this year we're projecting that our one profitable MCO will only be at about a 2% profit margin, and the other two will still be in about a 10% loss situation. So with that said, whenever we do make reductions to what we pay the MCOs, it often gets passed on directly to the providers. And that's one of our biggest concerns, is that we'd be hitting the providers twice, potentially. We'd have to cut their rates to reach this budget, and then we'd cut the MCOs, which would potentially pass those cuts on to the providers as well.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senator Burt, this is actually what keeps us all up at night, is this question about the budget. I'm really pleased to tell you that we know exactly how much we're going to spend this year, plus or minus $135 million. That's a big range. I've never dealt with that in my entire career. Why is that? Well, for every quarter in which there is one day in which there's a public health emergency, HSD receives an additional, it started at $63 million a quarter, and now it's going up. It's a 6.2% increase in the federal match. So 63, and I think it's upwards, it's getting close to 70 million now in the third quarter. So we've gotten 3/4 of that. And that is intended to cover the extra costs of the program, which we're indeed seeing now. Everybody keep their fingers crossed that we have a public health emergency in another 7 hours and 46 minutes. If on October 1st it's still going, we'll get another $70 million. We think, based on what we're projecting, that there's going to still be those costs of COVID. As you all know, we're not all going to be vaccinated by the summer. And so without wanting to give even the slightest impression of not being totally accountable, we think the real solution to this is to have continued federal support, like we've had for the past 3 quarters, we're likely to have for this coming quarter, for that. If we get that federal support, then that $135 million goes away after the first 2 quarters of calendar year 2021. If we don't, then we have this giant menu of interventions. It's actually a spreadsheet, and you can just fill in numbers of what percent rate decrease would you give to this group or that group. And I just want, and so we're ready, but it's really hard to know whether to start implementing those now, today, because it's actually, you know, it would have been relatively easy to do it July 1, the previous July 1. It's going to be twice as hard to do it on January 1 because we only have 6 months to make up the deficit. But our budget projection is at a minus $135 million. It does not include federal support for Q1 and Q2 of calendar year next year. I know I should say Q3, Q4 of our state fiscal year. And so we are in sort of a holding pattern, trying to see what the federal government is going to do, but we are completely prepared to react as quickly as a giant department that's regulated by CMS can react to make all the changes necessary for the budget, both for the remainder of this year and for next year. Long answer, but really, really interesting situation to be. Normally we can pin it down to a lot closer than 135 million, but we think that we are really relying on continued federal support during the pandemic. We're not going to have herd immunity by April 2nd. And so we think I personally think we're going to get those 2 quarters. There could be a disruption or a break in the public health emergency nationally, but hopefully whatever that disruption is will not last for a full quarter.
Madam Chair, just one quick question. Dr. Strace also, 2 of the 3, Nicole mentioned 2 of the 3 are not making profit. So are we in danger of losing either one of those other 2, or what would be the status, is your impression, going into the rest of the year and into next year?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, and Senator Burt, great question, really important question, critical question for us. We do have 3 MCOs. Previously it was asked, are they for-profit or not-for-profit? And all of them actually are for-profit. Centene and Blue Cross Blue Shield are owned by national insurance companies with a much, much bigger economic base. Of course, they expect their subsidiaries in each state to break even, make a profit, but they do have a portfolio that combines all of those. Presbyterian is structured as a for-profit company, but actually is a subsidiary of a not-for-profit. We all know of Presbyterian Healthcare Services. And so they have a for-profit balance sheet and a not-for-profit ethos and strategy that runs that. I think that very question, though, gets to the issue of the bottom of the rate range again, because I think I'm not going to put words in your mouth, Senator Burt, but basically, I mean, to tie those two ideas together, if we kept everyone at the bottom of the rate range, that would make the problem worse for our two MCOs that are losing money. And so it is a delicate balance. And Secretary Como referred to the fact that there are big variables like what percent of people go to UNM, and so we are actually fixing those things. We're fixing those things that cause the biggest variation. We've come up with a new way to pay UNM, and now UNM has lowered their rates to all the MCOs to something similar to, I'm not going to say exactly the same, but similar to what we pay UNM for the Medicaid fee-for-service, so that decreases the exposure there. We do pay the MCOs according to some calculations related to how sick people are up till, I think it's now, we have been using just pharmacy data only, but effective 1/1, Nicole, please correct me because I want this right. Effective 1/1, we're going to be building medical expenses to that as well, which will make it even more accurate. So I think what we're shooting for is more to narrow this rate range rather than just put everyone to the bottom. And the way to narrow it is to identify those things that are critical to the success of the program, like a successful UNM specialty service and, operation and research, that they do, and graduate medical education to train doctors. That's just one of several examples. And we spent most of earlier today talking about another one, but I don't want to bore people. But that is the dilemma we're in. And you're absolutely right. We can't expect to maintain people. However, if we are paying them within the actuarial rate range somewhere, and 6 months later, those costs fit within that same rate range, then that's more on the MCO to become creative. And I used to do this for a living, figure out what ways to deliver more efficient care or higher quality care. The things we've already talked about, getting people in for annual wellness visits to reduce those subsequent costs, getting diabetics in to control their diabetes better so that they don't end up in the hospital. And that's kind of why we partner with the MCOs, because they are on the ground there and they can create these programs to make that happen.
Dr. Scrace, I appreciate the information, and as always, and Nicole, and I appreciate the fact that you're not only looking at the MCOs and the budget, their health is such a large part of this budget and the state's operation with not only state funds but federal funds that we get in. So I really appreciate the fact that you're not looking only at the MCOs but your entire department and all of the operations as a way to become more efficient, because we get to January, we're really going to need to be as efficient as we possibly can so that we can attempt to get through this year and then somehow build a 22 budget. So your efforts are appreciated, but don't stop where you're at. Keep digging as best you can. And that's all I've got, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead and make a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the very involved and in-depth discussion, Secretary Scrace and Director Como, regarding the actuarial rate ranges. And I would just like to note that within those, there is a profit margin that is built into those rate ranges, and part of the capitation payments that are in there, as well as a percentage of overhead costs. So I think that's just an important component to be aware of as we're talking about these and thinking through them, especially moving into future periods. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Got Senator Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I only have one question, and it was partially answered by staff. So how does this affect the expansion? Or does it keep it the same, or does it offer more?
Mr. Chair, Senator Gonzalez, what we see here is if referring back on slide 3. So when Centennial Care came into being in 2014, it coincided with the Medicaid expansion here in New Mexico. And I can get you some more detailed information in the progress report itself. It also has some enrollment trends with it regarding the expansion population. But I think what's important about that, in addition to the actual Medicaid expansion population growth, is also that there was a step down. They started off at 100% of that FMAP of the federal share, and it's been a step down beginning here in 20 that's now at 90%. So that's another important consideration with regards to the expansion population.
Very well, Mr. Chairman. So is there only one step down, or does it continue going down?
Mr. Chair and Senator Gonzalez, so there were a number of step downs I believe beginning in 2016, and in fact I thought this might come up, so I brought a chart here. So when it came into being, we were at 100% through the first 3 years, and then we had a incremental step down beginning in 2017, and from 2020 on, we're currently set at 90% of federal assistance for the Medicaid expansion population.
Oh, thank you very much. And does that also compare with other states? Is that the same?
Mr. Chair and Senator Gonzalez, yes, that is nationally for the Medicaid expansion population.
Very well, thank you.
Additional questions from committee members? Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. I think that, David, that takes care of today's business.
Amen, Mr. Chair.
Pardon? Go ahead.
This is David Space. Mr. Chair, we reserve 2 minutes at the end for some closing comments, and I do have a little bit of quick follow-up. Is that okay?
Okay, unless you want to catch it Friday. Go ahead.
This is just related to Medicaid, just very quickly. There are 41 rate cells, wanted to tell you that. And the thing about, that's an excellent question about the expansion population, the ACA expansion population, because right now, as people have lost their jobs, we're having a very significant enrollment. We have 58,000 new total enrollment in Medicaid since March. No one is dropping off the Medicaid rolls by agreement with the federal government in order to get that additional 6.2%. And and a lot of that new enrollment growth in the program is in the expansion population. They're the ones who were employed, who had employer-based insurance, lost their jobs, now on Medicaid. So it is a really important group of people, and Mr. Alberry's comments are all exactly correct. There was a gradual step down from 100% federal funding to 90%. Still a wonderful, wonderful FMAP, and that funding continues at 90% and would require congressional action to change that number in the future. And that's it. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here today to hear the report. I want to thank Mr. Rodbury. He did a great job. Lots of really detailed information. I asked my staff to start duplicating one of his figures in here so I could review it every month and really concur with the spirit of the report and commit our department to cooperating in any way we can to move these last number of things that haven't quite gotten across the finish line to get there.
Thank you.
Secretary Scrace, the number you were looking for, of that 58,000, just over 20,000 of those were in the expansion population.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Miscellaneous business, where are we, David? We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Any opposition to that motion? Motion carries.
Is this on? Yep. The LSC budget status report and for FY21, and it shows a slight surplus, a little less than 1%. A lot of that relates to vacancy savings because of the prospect of having appropriation reductions for FY22, causing us to delay filling vacancies. At tab, now I'm shifting entirely to information items. At tab O, I have the BAR report. I'm going to take a little longer, not very long, than I usually do on these information items since we have a few minutes before 5. A couple big bars are shown on the second page at tab O. One of them is for approximately $500 million for the Department of Transportation. This is something that happens every year. It's what we call rollover of unspent appropriations, where the projects have been committed, but the cash not expended. So in some ways, that's a technical item. We have lots of federal funds bars coming in. We also, on page 5, have one I want to flag. This is, interestingly, an $11 million budget adjustment to renovate the general headquarters of the Transportation Department. You know, this is a project that they committed to under the auspices of an energy conservation project. Ordinarily, it's not the way to go to bring forward a big capital outlay renovation, although being aware of it, it was included as a permitted budget adjustment in House Bill 2 this year. Moving to tab P, we have the monthly cash balance report. And I've flagged some of the items of interest, and generally these items show increases year over year. So, for example, Transportation Department up $75 million in balances for the road fund for August 19 to August 20. LEDA up from $69 million, I'm on page 3 of 7 now. LEDA up from $69 million to $89 million. Now, this is cash. It doesn't reflect encumbrances and awards, but it shows that there's still a large amount of unspent LEDA appropriations. Look just below that at the Board of Pharmacy, of all things. Cash balance is going from $3.6 million to $5.7 million. So we're in a hiring freeze right now, and I think you'll see this trend of higher balances. Let's see, tab Q, the monthly FTE report. Year over year, employment is up 1.8%, but from July 1 this year to September 1 this year, employment is down 1%, a reflection of the hiring freeze. And I think as you think about the request that we're going to talk about in a minute for spending reductions, it's possible to accommodate that given the hiring freeze. At tab R, we have all general fund requests for agencies. We emailed that to you, but now you have a paper copy. Generally, agencies followed the DFA and LFC instructions and the LFC guidelines to bring in general fund appropriations at minus 5%. A couple exceptions, we have HSD at plus 3%, all of the judicial branch, DAs, courts, and public defender at plus 4%. They want to unwind the special session solvency reductions, and we have yet to hear from higher ed and public schools. And finally, we have Dr. Courtney, who will present at tab S briefly the performance evaluation work plan, and then we'll stand for questions on any of these items.
Thank you, Director Abbey. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Tab S, you'll see the program evaluation work plan, which we've constructed. Our program evaluation manager here, Michaela Fisher, also helping with this. I'll highlight that for next month, we should have 2 reports for you. One program evaluation on the Department of Game and Fish, and you'll remember that a few months back, we had an update for you on school closures and potential impact of school closures on education. We're trying to turn around another project for you on returning to school and making up lost learning time there. Subsequently, you see into November, the follow-up for Jacob's progress report today, the evaluation on 2.0, and then a couple policy spotlights there that actually came out of some ideas that Director Salee, Deputy Director Salee and I talked about a few months back on outcome evaluations. So those will be ready by December. And then next up we have, and I know you all were talking about this a bit this morning, kind of in the hopper, program evaluation on tax gap audit and compliance that we're preparing. Mr. Chairman and members, that highlights the major projects that the program evaluation has underway.
Any questions on Representative Crowder?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the Agency Code 665 Action Plan to Reduce Suicides, I know we have a statute on the books requiring the Department of Health to do a report, and the Department of Aging and Long-Term Care Services to provide information to the senior citizens regarding gambling-related suicides, bankruptcies, and domestic violence. And so I'm curious if the suicides from gambling will be included in this report to reduce suicides. Could that be included? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Crowder, I believe that's something that we could look into. The kind of the design of these types of outcome evaluations is to really take a deep look into both the geography where the problem is the worst, and then also demographics, or as you said, some potential examples of where this is happening more. So those are definitely something things that we'll dig into.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just Secretary Kunkel last year made the comment that for 8 years they have not provided a report, and they're supposed to provide an interim report. Haven't done that for 8 years, and so any opportunity I get, I want to make sure that we get it to the point where we are getting a report and where the senior citizens are being made aware of some of the issues with gambling. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Crowder, that's heard loud and clear, and we'll dig into that.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be really short. Director Abbey, I had a question about, we were talking about general fund appropriation summary by agency, and basically it goes like this. In this year's budget, we appropriated general fund dollars for public school education in New Mexico. In the newspaper, I read about declining enrollment in a number of schools. That suggests that we have overfunded public school education, in my mind, because our budget was based on higher enrollments, not lower enrollments. Then by January, what will we know relative to consideration of an adjustment or a fix or a leave it alone?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Anderson, members have had some conversations with superintendents in the last couple weeks on that very issue. And in terms of over or underfunding, remember the legislature, based on a staff recommendation, took a $44 million credit for federal funds with CARES that was billed as non-recurring, kind of an expectation to replace it next year. And that was not real popular, and districts protested that they had commitments to spend that money, and of course, with 90 districts, the experience is all over the place. So districts will likely realize vacancy savings from the smaller enrollment this year, and we've seen those reports from APS already, that they have pressure off by not having to fill all vacant positions because of smaller enrollment. So it's kind of a mixed bag about the status of funding this year. There isn't any question that districts under a lot of pressure to try to accommodate, hotspots and buy computers and accommodate distance learning and try to figure out how to get, and buy all the PPE and stuff like that. So it's kind of the verdict is out on that. By the time we get to December, we will have a 40-day count. And the 40-day count will give us an insight into, we will fund schools next year by current law according to this year's enrollment. And districts are asking for some relief from that. But, there's a real question who will return and when. So we'll have more information, and then you'll have some policy issues before you.
Senator Kernan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just going back to Representative Crowder's concern about the suicide report, and I would like to make sure that they also include our youth. We've had a real uptick in suicides across the state related to the school closures, and I keep asking for numbers, and they have good reasons for not being able to give that to me at this point. But I hope by December they will have some firm figures on what has occurred across the state with regard to youth suicide.
Additional questions? Representative Lundstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The report that's always most interesting to me, Mr. Chairman and David, is the LFC cash balance report on P. And I'm looking there at your grand total, and there's a big difference there. Is that due to CARES funding? That would be on page 7?
Yes, and the CARES funding is shown under DFA.
I see it on page 6.
Or no, it's shown under the general fund, which is, yes, on page 6 of 7, 991 million this year that wasn't last year, and that explains much of the change year over year.
So what we're hoping to see then, Mr. Chairman and David, is a change, hopefully, for this quarter under fund code. Is it 8530 or 8540? Up at the top there on page 7, if that part of that 750 million is moved.
We would expect, according to the testimony of Secretary Romero this morning, for that CARES, just general fund alone, she represented she would move 325 out of that account, out of the 991, and it would go into the appropriation account, which is the second line on page 7. The appropriation account is always in the red, but it would be less than the red by that 325 based on her representation this morning.
All righty, I appreciate that, and I also appreciate this report on R, General Fund Appropriations Summary by Agency. So this percentage, as you'd mentioned, decrease is coming directly from them. Is that correct?
Yes, Madam Chair. These are the agency requests to LFC and the DFA. And so LFC is having hearings on all these requests all fall. You'll start tomorrow. And the DFA and LFC will move to make a recommendation based on these requests in December. And then the governor will make one. It'll be due in a 60-day session year on January 10th. The governor will take the request and make her recommendations based on these requests. And it's, it's helpful in some ways. Heavier lifting has been done than usual in the executive branch, recognizing the kind of uncertainty and the downside risks that I don't need to remind you of. It's helpful in a lot of ways to have these requests more modest than usual.
All righty. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Additional questions? 8:30 in the morning. Thank you all very much. Yeah.
Well, I do.
Yeah, why don't we go to Mary Kay's office?
We'll tell Mary Kay.
Yeah. Mary Kay. Mary Kay. We're going to go to your office a few minutes, and you're supposed to be there. Yeah, we're bringing a drink over. And
We're going to have an executive
session. And then, do you want to go to dinner with Jeanette and Deborah and I tonight?
You know, I would love to.